of the face, chapter 15. It is this backward motion toward the source, against the stream, that we most see ourselves in. The tribute of the current to the source. It is from this in nature we are from. It is, most of us. West Running Brook, Robert Frost. Mrs. Doyle had gotten the kids breakfast and brought them over to her house. Weissman was in the Porsche, headed for the clinic. The meager amount of sleep had not rectified his thoughts. Doubts about Jamie still plagued him. He tried to put it all together. He knew from what he had observed at the farmhouse that they were not acting rationally, and Hastings was an idiot for not being able to perceive that fact. As he zoomed by the college area, the old memories came back. That was another time when he and Jamie were friends. It was a time when the young Pendleton kid could command his way through anything, even taking the woman that Weissman loved. But clearly he was not back in 1967. As he left the college, Weissman was determined to take Marta away from Jamie. The time was ripe, and he would never be in a better position. He hated Jamie with every passing minute. And what of Marta? Would she ever get better? He had a gut reaction that he would just be able to pull her out of that clinic. For the first time in 15 years, Marta needed him, and he knew it. In his mind, he had formulated a plan of action ready to be implemented. He would travel down to Concord later that day with Marta safely inside the clinic and under the supervision of the doctors. Nothing would happen to her. His trip would only take a few hours and then he'd be back. During that time, however, he'd check out every part of Jamie's story and prove him wrong. That would be the final split between Marta and Jamie. It would be easy to have her then because, under it all, he wanted to do anything for her and help her from her depression. Marta had been told by Dr. Casey that Weissman would be coming down to see her, and seeing Weissman could keep her going. He was the only person, not only in the town, but in the entire world, that she could trust. She washed her hair and showered, and as Weissman walked into the lobby with a vase of long-stem roses, she was still in her bathrobe. "Oh, Bernie," she cried as she hugged him tightly. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, looking at the roses. "Yeah, I thought this might cheer you up, Marta." As he handed the vase to her, he smiled. "Well, they smell wonderful. Let me tell you, they smell great," she said as she inhaled deeply. "I slept well after Casey talked to me." "Well, it's all right now. I'm here with you. Everything's going to be fine. The kids are over with Mrs. Doyle at her house. They're safe. We don't have to worry about them when I go down to Concord." "Oh, thank God. I'm afraid that Jamie's going to try and find them." "He won't find them, I assure you." She looked out the barred window and into the snow-covered fields in back of the hospital. And then she turned to Weissman. "Casey told me what you and Hastings found out at the farmhouse this morning." "Oh?" "They're wrong, you know. I'm still positive about what I saw. This time, the images upstairs in the bedroom, Jamie in the car, the skating rink, it's all real, Bernie. I don't care how crazy that makes me. I'm sick and tired of telling them what they want to hear. I won't do that anymore. Maybe I'm learning a lot about myself throughout this whole thing. I don't know. But I do know that forces are operating within this town. I don't know if they're supernatural forces or something else, but Jamie has the power." "Forces?" "Forces that can manipulate objects. Forces that can live to kill. Just what McAllister said. We will live to die. Forces that can heal bodies, repair damage to themselves and to the whole area around them. Evil forces. Monstrous evil." Weissman was a little taken aback by her latest theories, but he tried to pacify her. He hoped in vain that she would somehow snap out of it. "Well, how do they do it?" "I don't know, but I could see it. Those little red circles in their eyes, like something is inside, possessing them." "And you've seen these circles before. You told me that yesterday." "Oh, yes. In the bedroom, at the rink, in the house last night. Bernie, my mind just keeps running back to Friday night. Jamie, all shot up and mumbling something about a universal or gray dent. And then he said something about 12 to 4. Then he died. Well, what do you think this means, Marta? He asked, trying to believe what she was saying. I don't know, but I'll figure it out. Well, I do admit that Jamie's been acting very strange since his return. He's not the same man who came into my apartment on Friday night. Right, that's what I mean. He's been acting, aside from what I saw last night, like a real creep. He's always been disinterested in my feelings, but he's never been so violent or vicious. Never smiles except when he's digging at you. And he's so preoccupied thinking about something or waiting to do something. Yeah, right, said Weissman as the little gathering in the kitchen farmhouse popped into his mind. This whole thing is very strange, very strange. She turned and looked out the window, sensing that he was also judging her insane. He thinks I'm crazy? He's just agreeing with me so I don't go off the deep end? Oh, God, he's just doing this because he cares. He really does care. Even if he doesn't believe a damn thing I say, he cares. He really cares. If I could just show him I'm right, give him some proof. I'm going down to Concord, Marta, he said as he turned around, enlightened that he at least doubted Jamie's story. You're actually going to check out his story? Yeah. Hastings tried to talk to the rental car people, but they won't give out any information over the phone. Even to a police chief? No. When I'm down there, I'll also go over to the university in Concord. I want to know just who he talked to when he was down there. Then you don't believe him? No, I don't. I think he's been treating you miserably, and this is just the latest example of it. Thank you, she said as she came over and held his hands. For what? For at least believing part of my story and caring enough to do something about it. When are you leaving? Right after I check on the kids. I don't trust anyone now, Bernie, she said as she looked into his eyes. You don't have to do all this, you know. No, I want to. What if Jamie's story checks out? Then we'll take it from there, Marta. You won't have a leg to stand on, Bernie. It'll all be in Jamie's hands. He and my family will have the authority to put me away for the rest of my life. Just look at the outside corridor. There's a security guard on duty. I'm sure he has instructions to watch me and make sure I don't get out of here. I'm dangerous, Bernie. Not Jamie, not my family. Me, I'm dangerous. It's not you. I know for a fact that God is out there at all times. And if I find out that Jamie's a liar, it will certainly reduce his standing with the court. And if he's up to something else, then you'll have even more of a chance for the kids. I hate Jamie. I hate him. I want to know the truth, said Marta as she grew angry. Just promise me you'll stay here till I get back. Don't try anything foolish. I will stay put. Now, let's get the kids up, she said as she took his hand and led him into the corridor. A new nurse was stationed behind the desk. She looked toward the security guard as Marta approached. Mrs. Pendleton, Dr. Casey has requested that you remain in your room until he sees you later this morning. I mean, this lady's been through a lot. Come on. Weissman led her back to the room and sat down on the bed next to her. Won't take me more than a few hours to get things done in Concord. I'll call the front desk when I find out what the hell's going on. So don't fret, you'll be hearing from me. We'll solve this thing together. I'll stay by you, Marta, no matter how things turn out down there. Marta put her head against his chest and squeezed him tightly. It gave her that vital reassurance which would carry her through until the next time he was with her. He looked into her eyes, feeling the long brown hair in his arms. Please be careful, Bernardo, she said as she rose. I will, he said with a note of regret in his voice. He didn't want to leave her. The horrible events of the past few days had brought out different feelings in both of them. But he had to find out the truth. They embraced one final time, and then he hurried from the room. She watched him cross the parking lot and get into the Porsche. He wound up the engine and began his long journey down to the state capitol to find out the truth. Maya the Face, Chapter 17. Power may justly be compared to a great river. While kept within its bounds, it is both beautiful and useful. But when it overflows its banks, it is then too impetuous to be stemmed. It bears down on all before it and brings destruction and desolation wherever it comes. Alexander Hamilton. It took Weissman about 2 hours to get to the center of Concord. He was very concerned by what Marta had told him at the clinic. Red glows in the eyes, manipulation of objects. She must have been losing control. Maybe she thought she was at the mercy of others and had to act out these inadequacies. His only hope now was to salvage at least a part of this nightmare of a weekend, and he could do that by proving something on Jamie. He found the rental car building and pulled into the parking lot. His first impulse was to search the lot for the car that Jamie had brought to St. Argus. It was nowhere to be found, and the air outside was freezing. He hurried to the door and stepped into the warmth. The clerk was waiting on an older man. Weissman got in line behind the man. "Thank you very much, sir," said the young woman behind the counter. "Have a nice day." The man took his keys and headed out back as Weissman stepped forward. "Yes, sir, what can I do for you?" "Well, I guess I need a little information." "If I can be of help, what kind of information do you need?" "I want to check on a car that was procured here last Friday afternoon." "Was that car taken out in your name, sir?" asked the girl. "No, specifically I want to find out if the car was returned here. It was used by a close friend of mine." "I'll have to check with my supervisor about that." She smiled and went into the back room. About a half a minute later, a neatly groomed man in a three-piece suit stepped up to the counter. "Yes, sir, what can I help you with?" he asked with a big smile. "Well, as I told the girl, I'd like to check the status of a certain car. It was signed out last Friday." "Are you with the authorities, sir?" No, I'm a close friend of the man who signed out the car." "I don't understand." "See, this man was supposed to leave St. Argus. He was gone for 2 days. I've been trying to trace his movements. I really don't see anything wrong about just finding out if he returned the car." "Did you call earlier?" No, that was the police chief in St. Argus, Dan Hastings. He said you wouldn't give out any information over the phone, so here I am." "That's company policy." "Okay, so I drove all the way down here for nothing." "Well, very well. I think I can comply with your request. Very simple. Miss Smith, do you remember?" "Yes, a man and his wife, 2 children. They came in here Friday afternoon. He was scheduled to have the car for 10 days, and they were headed to St. Argus." "Well, did he bring the car back?" asked Weissman as he felt his hopes ready to come crashing down. No, he didn't." And a cold chill swept through his body. "Oh, my God. Can you check with the other terminals?" he asked very quickly. He was very much aware of what this meant. "I have to find out if he returned that car." "Well, I can check on the computer," said the man. Yeah, please. "Okay. The whole national and Canadian system's on the computer. Just take a seat, sir. I'll start the run." Thank you very much," said Weissman as he stepped aside for another man in line. He walked over to the chair and sat down. He rubbed his temples and eyes as he tried to figure out just what Jamie was up to. And where was the car? He could have dropped it off at another location, but the main fact was that Jamie was lying. Weissman stared out the window at the passing traffic. The lights changed many times. New groups of cars drove by him. 25 minutes later, the girl called him up to the counter. She lifted the counter door up and motioned for him to come inside. "Mr. Leonard is back in his office," she told him and pointed to a side office. "Thank you," said Weissman as he went to the office. Leonard stood in front of a tiny computer terminal and looked over to Weissman as he entered the room. "Sorry for the delay there, Mr. Weissman, Bernie Weissman."
"The lines have been down for about an hour. I just started to get some action here. It should only be a few seconds."
"Yeah, I can wait."
"Just what's going on here? Did this guy do something wrong?"
"Let's just say he had no business being away so long, and I know for a fact he lied about returning the car."
Here it comes now," said Leonard. "Negative. That car, New Hampshire plate number 451208, is still open. It hasn't," he said, shutting off the machine, "been turned over back here, in the United States or Canada."
"Oh, shit. Damn," shouted Weissman as he clenched his fist. His suspicion was even greater now.
"Well, I can call you if it doesn't get turned in."
Yeah. Weissman took a pen from the table and wrote down his number. 'cause I live on May Street.
Very good, I'll let you know.
I appreciate it, and thank you for going to all this trouble.
Well, if you ever need a rental.
I'll call you guys.
Right. Have a nice day,
said Leonard as Weissman left his office. Thank you, he said to the girl as he went by. Sure, have a nice day. Weissman knew he was not going to have a nice day, nor did he ever want to hear that expression again. He stepped outside into the cold and hurried toward his Porsche. His next stop would be the chemistry department at the University of Concord, and he was more convinced than ever that Jamie had probably lied about going there, too. Weissman entered the chemistry building of the large campus in the afternoon. The building, like the campus, was deserted because of the intercession. No one, even the maintenance men, the janitors, or anyone else was in the building. He checked every floor and room, and then became depressed that he was not going to be able to prove anything on Jamie. Reluctantly, he left the building and headed for the car. At the last minute, however, he decided not to give up his search. He turned around and went into the adjacent physics building. That building was no different. As he reached the midpoint of the fourth floor, he heard a noise down the corridor. He increased his pace and came to an open door. The light from the outside was spewing forth into the darkened corridor. On the door was a black and white embossed plastic plaque for the chairman of the physics department, Dr. Edward B. Lawson. Weissman looked inside and saw an aging man with wire-rimmed glasses writing notes on yellow legal sheets. Excuse me. Yes, said the man as he looked up. Are you Dr. Lawson? I am he. Doctor, my name is Bernie Weissman. I'm sorry for intruding. You look busy. Well, I am busy. Please state your business. I have tons of work to do. Weissman stepped through the doorway. Doctor, I'm coming down here from St. August. I've just been over to the chemistry building, but it's empty. Semester break. Either everyone's gone to Florida or just off campus. My problem is this. I have a friend, a well-known chemist, who said he came down here last Friday night. He claims to have spent time with people in the chemistry department. So what? Well, I want to confirm that fact. Look, Mr. Weissman, I'm with the physics department. Perhaps you didn't read the sign out there. How can I get a hold of the chairman of the chemistry department? Doug Newman? Laughed Lawson. He's somewhere in the Caribbean sailing. He's been gone for the last 2 weeks. Well, can I talk to any other members of the department? Look, Mr. Weissman, I'm really busy. Don't you have a list or something? All right, grumbled Lawson as he opened the drawer to his desk and pulled out a thick book. This book lists all the faculty members by department. However, there are over 50 people in the chemistry department. Lawson handed him the book. I hope that helps you out. Just bring it back when you're done. Do you have a local phone I can use? Lawson stared at him for a few seconds. In the next office. He stood and opened the door. Just don't disturb me anymore. I have to get this work done. Thank you. I'll be quiet, said Weissman as he went into the other room and closed the door. He peered out the crack between the curtains. The day was getting cloudy and the room was very dark. He opened the curtains, looking over the campus as the last vestige of bright sunlight disappeared behind the clouds. There were 50 names on the list. It would take time. He had to decide whether this was all worth it. In his mind, he pictured Marta back at the clinic. Her mind would be lost if they decreed that she be put away. He couldn't allow that and had to prove that Jamie was wrong. Calling 50 people was not too much to ask. The telephone was on the window ledge. He picked it up and placed it on the desk as he sat down. As he opened the book, he could see just how long the list really was. He stared at the countless names, knowing full well of the monotonous task ahead of him. It was 1:45, and he picked up the receiver to dial the first name on the list, Professor David Allen. The gray sky had darkened considerably when Weissman set down the phone. He was ending the end of the alphabet with no success. Not one person had ever heard of Jamie Pendleton, let alone some business contact with him on the weekend. Weissman stood up and stretched. Opening the door, he saw Lawson still hard at work behind his desk. I'm all the way up to S, he exclaimed, but Lawson kept writing. That's good, he replied. I'll be back in a few minutes. I want something to eat. The doctor kept on with his writing, and Weissman headed for the food machines in the lobby of the building. With a dry tuna fish sandwich and a cup of murky coffee in his hands, he went over to the payphone next to the front window. He quickly dialed the number of the clinic and put the appropriate money in for the long-distance call. It seemed like hours before they got Marta to the front desk. She sounded very relieved that he had called.
Are you sure you're all right, Bernie?
Yeah, I'm fine, but listen to this. Jamie never returned the car to the rental place, nor any of their affiliates in the entire United States and Canada.
He was lying. He was really lying. I don't believe this. But why?
I don't know the answer to that. I've checked over 35 numbers on this chemistry department list. Nothing.
Nothing?
Right. They all think I'm some kind of idiot for calling them. Others I've tried several times, but they're not home. Marta, nobody's ever even heard of Jamie.
Can't stand it in here, Bernie. I really will go crazy if I have to spend much more time in here. It's like a prison. I called the kids at Mrs. Doyle's. They're doing okay.
Just try and sit tight. I'll be back tonight, he assured her.
Well, it's supposed to snow. They said so on the radio.
Can't be much longer. I just have to check all the possibilities.
Can't you check it later? I'm scared.
Why? Has Jamie been over there?
No. Just had another one of my feelings. I just want to get out of here and St. Argus to somewhere far away. Far away.
I know what you mean. I'd like that too, but I have to find out if Jamie was down here. Even if I have to look over the entire science department list.
You already know he lied.
I know he lied once. Look, Marta, I'll be back tonight.
Well, call me before you leave. I'm afraid. I'm afraid now that darkness is coming, especially after last night.
I understand, but you're in a safe place, and I promise to call before I leave. I wouldn't be doing this at all if it weren't for the fact that I have to have absolute proof before I go pointing the finger at Jamie. I'll be calling. Goodbye, Marta. Weissman had been unable to express his true feelings. He had wanted to tell her that he loved her, but his words had fallen flat. Before he reached the elevators, he got another couple of sandwiches and a cup of coffee. Lawson hadn't moved an inch from his desk. He was busily scribbling on the yellow paper as Weissman came into the office. "Thought you might like something to eat," said Weissman as he came back inside. "It's getting late." Lawson looked up and smiled. "All right. Thank you, Mr. Weissman. Could use something to eat. Okay, here, have some tuna," he said as he set the sandwich and coffee on the desk. "By the way, how are you doing on your list?" "Well, I don't know. I'm going to finish the chemistry department, then go to the rest of the science departments." "What about your friend? Has anybody been helpful?" he asked as he unwrapped the sandwich. "Looks like he never came down here at all." "Little white lie?" asked the professor. "More than that, Doctor," said Weissman as he sipped on his own coffee. "It's a long story. You see, he left 2 days ago. He was supposed to be gone for 2 hours and ended up being gone for close to 2 days. I guess he went someplace else." "Well, good luck in your search. You appear to have a lot of work ahead of you. 140 names just in math and physics. Certainly hope you find the right person." "Yeah, I sure hope so," said Weissman as he returned to the other office. The next few hours were sheer agony for Weissman. More and more of the same. Nobody had ever heard of Jamie Pendleton except for one man who remembered seeing the name on a report from USC. But this did little to console Weissman. Determined, he struggled through the entire listing of both math and physics, ending with Professor Yovanovitch, who was on a trip to Buffalo. He was exhausted by this point and very frustrated. It was well past 10 p.m., and he put his head on the desk. There were more departments left, unrelated departments, which would probably yield the same result. He was positive that Jamie had not come down to the university. It had been a high price to pay for that information, and he hardly knew what he would do with it. He picked up the entire listing, shut off the light, and went to Lawson's office. "I've had it," he said to Lawson, who was drinking another cup of coffee. "Which is more than I can say for myself. Another 2 days of work if I'm lucky." "Oh, I thought you were almost done." "Hardly. I started yesterday morning on this bloody thing, and I'll probably be here past midnight." "Sounds like important work." "Yeah, I wish it was. Just a report about all the lab work. If I could just stay in the lab, I'd be all set. I've made the upside-down quark my baby, Mr. Weissman. I study all kinds of subatomic particles. Very slow and tedious work, but not half as slow as this damn report, just to justify the work itself. It's an annual thing to the Board of Trustees. Well, I wish you the best in your efforts. It was kind of you to let me use the listing in the phone, he said as he put the listing on the desk. Quite all right, quite all right. Thank you for the food and coffee, and I hope you find what you're looking for. Someday, Doctor, I think I will. Thanks again, he said as he shook hands with Lawson and put on his coat. Good night, said the professor as he immediately got back to work. Weissman waved goodbye and disappeared into the dark corridor. His first destination was the telephone next to the food machines. Marta had told him that she was very upset this afternoon, and he hadn't even left for St. Argus. Now, many hours later, he was finally leaving for St. Argus. As he looked out the window, Weissman could readily see the snow had been coming down for hours. It was already piled on the top of the Porsche. He tried to reassure Marta that he would indeed be back in 2 hours despite the storm. But to his despair, she once more told him of her intense feelings of impending doom and how she did not feel safe, even in the clinic. But as she wept softly, he told her he was leaving for St. Argus. He hung up the telephone and stood in the indirect light of the food machines. Her sense of foreboding had been contagious. Weissman could feel the doom and also felt guilty for leaving her in the first place. But he now knew that Jamie was a liar. Caution was necessary before he confronted him with it directly. Instead, he even considered withholding what he knew and somehow tracing Jamie's exact movements over the last few days. His stomach growled. He turned to the machines, putting in most of his change as he stocked up for the journey back to St. Argus. He kept the tape player at full capacity, singing along with the music in order to keep awake during the intensifying storm. The plows had not yet cleared the highway, and he kept at a very stable speed. His voice tired rapidly as he turned down the tape deck and thought of Lawson on the fourth-floor office. Lawson, like Jamie, was putting in long hours to push forward his research. And what of Jamie? How different he had become since Friday night. The long hours of waiting for him to return, going down the cellar and getting the firewood, hearing Marta's screams, her recounting of the terrible tragedy, shot up with holes, mumbling his last words according to her. Universal gray dent. 12 to 4. What the hell did that mean? He had Lawson, a physicist, right in front of him. All he had to do was ask if he had ever heard of a universal gray dent. He was a scientist, and it sounded very scientific. The very answer might lead to Jamie's whereabouts that night, or at least give a clue. Food and fuel station was 10 miles up the road now, but he was already 20 miles out of Concord in a blinding snowstorm. The only way to contact Lawson, if he was still in the office, would be by telephone at the station.
Universal gradient?
Exclaimed Lawson from his office. Gradient? Oh, gradient.
Yes, why would you want to know about the universal gradient?
It's just something I heard, said Weissman as the snow whipped around the telephone booth.
Well, Mr. Weissman, the universal gradient refers to an area of experimental physics which I have a basic knowledge of. According to the theory, the universal gradient is the level of time and space that, when twisted, warped, or turned, reaches a certain basic level that becomes the universal gradient. It's at that point energy flows freely from that space, can be tapped for future use.
You mean power, don't you? Asked Weissman. Bits and pieces flew into his mind. Doctor, is it possible to gain that power with our current technology?
I seriously doubt it. That type of work, when perfected, probably hundreds of years away or more.
But it is possible, stated Weissman, shivering in the booth as the first snowplow went by on the highway.
Oh, sure, it's possible, but the initial cost would be astronomical. In other words, you'd have to be very well off to invest in such a venture. I think the government would be the one to attempt something as bold as universal power.
Listen, Doctor, I want to know about the side effects. What would it be, on human beings?
It's hard to say, Mr. Weissman. I would associate a number of cosmic rays with the process, including Tulip particles. They could be harmlessly reconverted or tapped for power.
Would it make sense for human beings to behave strangely? Asked Weissman. He was beginning to see that the hydro plant was doing more than just tapping water power.
No more strangely than we already do, but I've read papers cautioning against the warping of space. In essence, you have a window to the universe. Within a few hundred meters, you're literally side by side with a space a million light years across the universe. Therefore, as you pull in the space, there's more of a chance to pull in matter, planets, stars, even something cataclysmic like a black hole. But those opposing this say the universe is mostly composed of dark matter and probably nothing. A tiny amount of hydrogen atoms between the stars, and therefore they say the chances of pulling something in is almost nil.
Yeah, I see.
Mr. Weissman, why would you, a layman, be interested in such a complicated process?
Doctor, I think the experiments may already be underway right in this area at St. August. You must have seen the new hydro plant.
Oh yeah, I was invited up there last year when it opened. I toured the facility, but I hardly saw anything resembling universal power experiments.
Well, strange things have been happening up here. And someone mentioned the universal gradient just before he was murdered, said Weissman, bringing credence to Marta's story.
That's why you're looking over the list. What are you saying, Mr. Weissman?
I'm saying that the person who said he was in Concord was in reality inside that power plant. Of course, it all makes sense now. He wanted to blow the lid on the old man.
He what?
I may be dead wrong, but I think I put a part of this together. Doctor, I want you to come with me to St. August. I want you to take a closer look at that plant.
I think you have an overactive imagination, Mr. Weissman. Perhaps if you believe all this, you should contact the proper authorities now. Good night.
Doctor, cried Weissman into the telephone, but the line was dead. Damn! He set the phone back on the hook. He deposited another dime and called the clinic. It was now nearing 11 p.m., and he still had a long way to go to St. August.
Bernie, why are you calling me again? Is there something wrong?
Asked Marta from the desk. Yes, something's wrong. I found out the meaning of Jamie's last words the other night.
How did you do that?
I just talked to a doctor at the university. Universal gradient is a term used in the area of experimental physics. It involves something called universal power. The power plant on the river, Marta.
Power plant? How?
By selectively bending time and space. But after space is bent around, the space left over would be, in actuality, 100 million light years away, or so he told me.
That's what's going on at the hydro plant? And Pendleton is running the whole show?
Well, he does own the plant.
Then Jamie was going out there last Friday night and not to Concord like he said.
Yeah, maybe. I can't say for sure.
Could he have been affected by what they were doing out there?
There are particles given off. He might have been.
That would explain a lot, Bernie. It's snowing like hell up here.
Yeah, down here too, he said as he looked outside. It's going to take me another few hours to get back home. I'm still only 20 miles out of Concord. Why don't you try and see if you can get some sleep?
Whatever you think is best.
I'll wake you or come in the morning.
No, wake me.
All right, I should be there about 2. Tell the nurses I'm coming.
Bernie, does this mean I didn't imagine all those things?
Yeah, it might, Marta. I know we have to take this rationally. I'm building all this on speculation and assumption, and if I'm wrong, let's just take it step by step.
I agree.
Good. I'll see you in a few hours. Try and rest.
I will. Good night, Bernie.
She said as she hung up the telephone. Weissman wondered if he had said too much. Could have given her false hope when there was no hope at all, and he didn't fancy traveling over 100 miles through a blinding snowstorm. He bored his head into the wind as he ran over to the station pumps. After paying the attendant, he climbed into the Porsche. It was all so confusing and all so highly unlikely. He pulled onto the slick highway and over to the high-speed lane as he headed home. But it would be a slow trip, and he would have to contemplate everything he had been told. My Other Face, Chapter 18. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast, and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed. And the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts, but once heaved, forever grew still. Lord Byron. From almost the time she had hung up the telephone, Marta had it set in her mind she was going to leave the clinic. A one-man security team was not going to keep her confined in the lower clinic. She changed into her regular clothes, including several layers under her white parka. The hour was late as she pulled up the hood and was ready to go. She had reasoned it was only a matter of time before the guard left his station and checked the connecting corridors. Marta would go out after him. It would be simple. She would proceed through the door at the end of the corridor and up the stairs to the first floor of the hospital. It would mean either hitting the guard or breaking the door. But she now felt compelled to leave. She pulled out the bed crank and stuffed it in her pocket. It would be a quick move, and she would be outside in no time. Her destination would be the power plant itself. If she could prove Weissman's information was essentially correct, she would be one step closer to exonerating her own sanity, even if it meant risking her life to find the final truth. Rather to die, she thought, than to give up her life in some faraway sanitarium. The guard began his check around 11 o'clock. He walked casually from the nurse's station, as this was not a high-risk job. He followed the square-shaped corridor. Marta waited for him to round the first corner. She shut the door very slowly and slithered down the opposite wall of the corridor. When she reached the edge of the adjacent corridor, she could see the guard checking the door to the first floor. It would be very easy now if she slugged him across the skull, but she just couldn't do it. She waited as he walked down the corridor, but she was ready to make her move. He walked to the end and around the corner. As he disappeared, she went through the swinging glass doors and hurried to the upstairs doors. The glass was lined with wire, very sturdy. She slammed the bed crank, crushing the glass and the mesh. Scooping out a hole in the glass, she reached inside and pulled open the latch. An alarm would surely go off. She sprinted up the stairs and into the long hospital corridor. From experience, she knew the X-ray labs connected to the offices next to the lobby. Her memory served her well as she ran through the darkened rooms and into the forward area. With no resistance offered, she sprinted out of the lobby doors. The snow blew fiercely, but she had made it to freedom. She ran rapidly across the parking lot and into the low visibility. She quickly disappeared down the road. The building faded into the squalling snow. Perhaps they knew she was gone, or maybe nothing had happened. She couldn't be sure. Turning to her left, she left the road and cut onto Miller's cornfield. When she was a girl, she had crossed the field hundreds of times. It was all coming back to her now as she moved through the deep snow. Going to the plant would be tiring, but she knew all the shortcuts and could avoid the main roads. As she breathed heavily, she could hear the clock tower pounding out its late-night chimes throughout the countryside. The snow was deep, but Marta was obsessed with finding the truth, and the muscle cramps in her legs meant very little. Her face seemed frozen from the wind chill, and her mind was revolving like a spinning top, always coming back to the same point of origin. Universal gradient, the power. Jamie wanted to find out what was going on at that plant. No wonder he couldn't tell me. No wonder. He knew. He knew it was dangerous, and he knew he was going to stop his father. But then he changed. Mean and vicious, not the man that came here last Friday, not the man that I knew years ago. How am I to know what he'll do next? She looked back into the snowy haze. They must be searching now. Hastings must know. They must be looking over the whole damn town for that lunatic named Marta Pendleton that escaped. She broke her cage and now is on the loose. Seeing more flashes, no doubt, the flashes. I haven't seen any flashes. It was all real. I'm sane. I'm sane. But the woods were dark and deep. It would take a great deal of stamina as well as steady nerves to make the 2-mile trip through the forest. The snow seemed to be abating somewhat as the moon shined through the low-moving silver clouds. She made it across the field, always looking upward at the eerie sky. There was no doubt about it. She was frightened and hesitated about going into the grove. The farm lights had glowed in the back, but Marta DuPont Pendleton knew she had to make it. She had to make it out to that plant and find the truth. Woods, the snow was not as deep, and Marta actually began jogging. She was petrified by the isolation and had the feeling that anything could spring out at any second. The distant sounds of traffic and dogs barking in the night echoed throughout the deep forest. Above her, the giant pines and massive oaks cracked and bent in the wind. She had no choice but to increase her pace, hurrying through the unknown darkness toward the river road. She figured it took her 20 minutes, but she did make it out to the road. At least 200 yards down the road was the bridge that led to the plant. She stood on the road's edge, like her husband 3 nights before, and she studied the blinking lights atop the main brick building. And like him, she thought, she was saturated with an insatiable curiosity about what lay inside. She imagined herself as a secret agent in a movie. Looking both ways down the street, she ran along the edge of the woods near the bridge. The road was clear, and she trekked into the open area which led to the river. And now she didn't have to lift her feet through the snow and hurried up the sanded incline as she looked back in every direction for her pursuers. Everything, including the plant, seemed unusually clear. The chain-link fence to the parking lot was open, as it had been on Friday night. At this higher level, the wind whipped up the valley, and she had to fight the blast as she headed for the side door of the warehouse. The door opened easily, but when she looked inside, she was mortified at the sight of the rented car. It was covered in blood and pierced with bullet holes, just as she had seen on Friday night. Weissman might have been close to the truth. Either she was in an endless fantasy, or she really had seen Jamie pull up to the Churchill apartment. The entire scenario threatened to overwhelm her. She had to fight off whatever her emotions were telling her. That uncontrollable evil was waiting for her inside the plant. That uncontrollable evil. The air was warmer inside the empty plant. She touched the bullet holes with her fingertips, pushing in the punctured edges. They were very real. Even this could be another delusion of her mind, but she was not going to believe that possibility, especially when she saw the seat, painted with the caked, brown-stained blood of her husband. This car smelled as if a dead animal had been allowed to rot under the seat for weeks on end. Something awful was going on here, something which had changed her husband. She sweat under the down-filled parka and took it off, in several layers. Removing the keys from the car, she opened the trunk and stuffed the clothes inside. Then she threw the keys across the seat and looked into the warehouse. Somebody was coming. She could hear the footsteps outside the parking lot door. There was no time to think. She scurried behind a stack of boxes to her left. The outside door opened. She almost choked on her own breath as Jamie, accompanied by his father, walked stiltedly into the warehouse. Both men were silent and looked like professional mourners. The short, jerky motions bothered her, and they moved along a stack of cartons. Marta moved in a clockwise fashion as the men rounded the boxes. She held her breath and prayed they would not see her crouching body. They looked intent in their purpose, heading for the adjacent room. Turning the corner, the 2 men went to the white staircase which led to the upstairs offices. I have to follow them. I have to follow them. They must be heading to the heart of this thing. And there must be other men inside, probably just like them. I'm so lucky I've gone this far. Now what the hell do I do? I have to go. I have to. Because it really doesn't matter anymore. They're both changed. The power has somehow changed them. Just the fact that they're together when they hated each other. I have to go. I'm going. She made her way across the room and up the stairs, but they weren't inside as she peered through the glass doors. At the end of the carpeted hallway was a chrome-silver elevator. Perhaps they had taken the elevator. She opened the doors and moved inside. The soft carpet absorbed any sound she made. She passed through the environmental maintenance room and stood in front of the elevator. If she took the elevator, she would emerge right in front of them. There was no choice. She would have to take the stairs to her right. They were concrete casts like the inside of a city parking garage. She rounded the stark and featureless stairwell, descending 20 levels before she could sense any activity. There were strange sounds coming from the inside of a large metal door on the 21st level. Static sounds and modulating frequencies. The door opened easily. She found herself at the end of an extremely long corridor that was dimly lit by an indefinite source at its end. She let the door shut and sprinted ahead. Her footsteps echoed loudly. She did not care who could hear her. Brilliant light ahead brought her to a sudden stop. She shielded her eyes from the dramatic changes in tint and brightness. As she opened the door, it hit her fully, like sitting inches away from a wide movie screen. It was all so very confusing as she looked into what looked like warped space. All around 360 degrees was an intense region of light and accompanying sounds. She could see a small overhang surrounding the elevator shaft. Instruments and gauges were working perfectly. She watched Jamie, his father, and Dr. Minos as they all stood with vacant expressions and gazed below into the light. The acoustics were sufficient to hear their words.
"It has been done,"
said the old man.
"We have changed the hydro once and for all. And a change that will last forever. The Amenti region
He said slowly and raised his arms as he pointed forward.
will be open now, and they will flow freely into our world. All will live to die, over and over and over again."
Dr. Minos pushed a series of switches and buttons. He typed something into the computers, and the region seemed to heat up with a high intensity. The ever-changing light shifted toward the violet end of the spectrum as the system moved into high gear. The tiny figures on the platform were dwarfed by the overpowering glow.
"They are free to emerge at will in the NU regions of overlap anywhere within the town.
Said Minos.
Our task here is complete."
They are the bundles, coming through at will. Not just behind the overlap region, but they can come through anywhere in the town and possess anyone who dies. Weissman! Weissman! Where the hell are you, Weissman? Where the hell are you, Weissman? In the distant spaces of the bright light, Marta could see hundreds, maybe even thousands of the tiny bundles swarming through the violet haze. They were brighter now than she had seen them in the past, as if a final barrier had been removed. They could come through easily now, and the plant was set for universal power ad infinitum. Her heart pounded when she saw them lingering, just waiting for someone to die. Then they would move in, possessing that person in an unthinkable symbiotic relationship. A form of life from across the universe, from another space and time. It saturates the human soul and primes the bodies for the killing, and then repairs all the damage. Or am I crazy? Am I just making all this up to fit my own insanity? To explain why I've seen dead people and why they're not alive now? Weissman, Weissman, I need you, Weissman. Below, she saw her old man Pendleton take the long-bladed knife from under the console. Her throat tightened. She wanted to look away, but she felt compelled to keep her eyes glued on his actions. Pendleton, like a programmed robot, thrust the knife into Jamie's chest. With a bizarre smile, his son dropped to the floor, blood gushing forward. For a second, perhaps a third time, she had seen her husband mortally wounded. Minos was the next attacker. He came forward and started choking the old man. They struggled for the knife, but Pendleton didn't have the strength to hold him back. His face turned even brighter red, then blue. Minos banged his head against the counter, slicing and cutting up his face. The old man, too, fell to the floor, hitting with a thud. But Minos was not through. He took the knife and began brutally hacking at the corpse over and over again. When he lifted the blade toward himself, Marta looked away. Then she heard him fall to the floor as he had thrust the blood-coated metal directly into his face. His eyes were open wide as he slowly fell forward, hitting more consoles in the floor and embedding the knife further into his brain. By this time, Marta was running through the darkened corridor. She slowed and felt her way around for the metal door. Opening it quickly, she rushed up the stairs. Her mind was blank as she reached the top of the stairs. She had no recollection of having run up to the top. Her In her disorientation, she breathed heavily and ran down the carpeted corridor. Then it all snapped back to her. She darted into one of the side offices and picked up the telephone. She quickly dialed the operator. Operator! Operator! Get me Chief Hastings right away! This is an emergency! The operator's voice sounded like all the others. Low, unattached, and deadly.
You will live to die. Let me kill you. Now. I want to murder you. Right now.
Marta hurled the telephone across the room and put her hands to her mouth. The whole town had become infested with the bundle creatures. They must have been spreading uncontrollably. My children, I have to get to my children before they're all killed. Oh, God in heaven, stop this. God help us all. Sandy, Mitchie. No, no. Her words repeated in her mind as she ran from the office to the staircase. She kept looking back for the dead men to appear at the top of the stairs and take hold of her. The way was clear, however, as she reached the rental car without any problem. Reaching inside, she took the keys off the seat and hurried around to open the trunk. She took her clothes from the trunk and threw them inside the front seat, and then rushed for the door opener. The door began to rise, and she raced back to the rental car. They hadn't come for her yet. The car started right up. She looked into the rearview mirror amidst the stench inside. Pendleton's Mercedes was parked along the chain-link fence outside, and the fence gate was open. It was at that time she saw two rimmed circles staring at her from the back seat darkness. It was Pendleton's associate, Al, and he lunged toward her body.
You will die. Die like us.
No, she screamed. I'll never be like you. I want to live. I want to live. She cried as his icy fingers of death slithered around her throat.
I could kill you with my bare hands or with this.
He held up a long-barreled revolver. Marta stepped on the gas. The sudden jolt caused Al to pull the trigger. The gun fired, but the bullet entered his forehead. The blood matter and the red spray covered the side windows and back of her neck. She stopped the car in the parking lot and leaped outside. He would soon be revived by the creatures and be ready to kill again. She dragged him from the back seat and left him on the asphalt. Slamming the door, she returned to the front seat of the car and sat in her husband's dried blood. It would take her at least 5 minutes to get to the Pendleton mansion. She kept praying that the children were all right, and more than that, she actually beckoned insanity. Then, this nightmare would be only a manifestation in her mind. That which was so terrible would be isolated in some far, uninhabited region deep within her own brain. Weissman, where are you? She yelled as she spun the car around and headed down the steep road. Weissman, I need you. Get my children the hell out of this place. She sped across the bridge and back toward the center of town. Weissman had just passed the sign which told him St. Argus was still over 60 miles away. The storm was blasting the mountains in front of him. He had been reduced to a speed of a mere 30 miles an hour on the snow-covered highway. Plows could not keep up with the dumping effect of the blizzard. Now he had his suspicions about the plant, but he couldn't prove anything, nor could he speculate correctly about the creatures which burst through the regions of the plant. He had no idea what the ramifications would ultimately be. And above it all, he could not possibly know what was happening to Marta just 60 miles ahead across the mountains in the little town just on the Canadian border. Marta let up on the gas when she made it across the bridge, but the car kept going. At first, she thought the pedal was stuck and she rapped it several times, but it was not a mechanical breakdown. Jamie, who seemed to possess the power to manipulate objects over a limited range, had somehow gotten a hold of the acceleration cable just like he had the night before. Only this time he had recovered from another death and was gaining, not losing, strength. The car was unquestionably out of her control now. She was approaching 60 miles an hour along the river road, then 70 miles an hour. The car was just going too fast to control, but she could not stop it and crashed through a barbed wire fence and into a farmer's field. The car plowed deep through the snow like an icebreaker, and its speed was actually increasing. If he was not going to kill her directly, then he would kill her this way. She would end up like the rest of them, with no hope, no future, no life. The farmer's house was only a few hundred yards away, and the car kept moving through the snow. She tried pulling at the keys and actually succeeded in removing them from the ignition. But even with the engine completely off, the car was unaffected. It was on a collision course with the house and the barns ahead. Marta had little choice other than jumping out. She took her clothes off the seat and tucked them around her stomach and bunched up her body. As the snow flew upward from the tires, she thrust open the door, and at an incredible speed she leaped from the car. She tumbled so rapidly she lost consciousness, coming to rest face up in the moonlight, surrounded by over a foot of snow. Yet the car kept going, caught the side of the barn, and then pushed through the wall of the farmhouse. Seconds later, there was a prodigious explosion. The house caught fire by the time Marta sat up, and in just a few minutes, the house was one massive fireball. She felt as if every muscle in her body had been torn apart. Snow was stuffed down her jeans and heavy sweatshirt, and she knew very well, as she looked into the fire, if she hadn't jumped from the car, she, like the people in that house, would be trapped in a fiery hell, destined to emerge to die again. Standing slowly, she held her side. Her ribs were bruised, maybe even broken, and her head was ringing as she tried to orient herself. The lights of the town were to her right, and the clock tower at 12:30. The Pendleton mansion was up the hill, several hundred yards to the left of the clock tower. She found her clothes and quickly shielded herself from the bitter cold. The highway was not far away. Her ankle bothered her now from the fall, and she limped through the snow toward the road. In the distance, she could hear mad howling, shots being fired, and people screaming. It was as if the whole town had lost its collective sanity. It was in the center of a war zone. There was no way she could travel that route and hope to stay alive. Once again, she crossed over the highway and stepped into another field. As she limped in pain, she skirted the town in the confusion and slowly made her way around to the base of the Pendleton Hill. The Pendleton mansion, white in the moonlight, stared down at her. Every light in the house seemed to be burning extra brightly, as if the old man were holding an extravaganza. Only this gathering threatened to surpass anything that had ever taken place inside that mansion. As she stepped away from the hill, she could feel immovable, unfathomable forces grasping around her body and dragging her toward the hill. No, I don't want to go there. No. She was dragged toward the driveway, and as she fought to run down the hill, her body was taken along the asphalt and marched against her will toward the mansion disappearing within the trees for a short time, but the glow of the lights lingered above the crest of the hill. Marta fell forward and was dragged through the snow along the drive and up toward the mansion. Then her body was turned upright, and she struggled to run back down the hill, but was spun around in midair and drawn toward the front door. There appeared to be no one inside, despite the burning lights. The wind slapped against her, blowing her hood back several times. The house was indeed empty inside, yet the fire was blazing. The huge wooden door opened toward the inside of the mansion, and the light shone over her body. No, I won't join you. She was pulled forward and across the tiles. No! The warmer air blew across her face, pushing her brown hair back. All movement returned to her body, but the door slammed behind her, and when she went to open the brass doorknob, the door was secured shut. She moved up to each window, pushing them one by one, but they wouldn't budge. And then she turned. It was only the second time she had ever been in the mansion. The other time being when Jamie had the final confrontation with his father. Everything was just as she had remembered it. Slowly, she walked down the hallway, looking up at the brightly lit chandelier. She headed toward the north wing. The door to her right, past the drawing room, was closed, but a seal of light surrounded it. She opened the door quickly. Pendleton's Dobermans on the far side of the room spun around and bared their teeth. Get away from me! Get away from me! They were covered with scattered blood and they were foaming at the mouth, but it was the red glowing circles that caused her to shuffle back. Even animals had not been left out of the carnage. As they sprung through the air, she slammed the door and then locked it. The dogs clawed at the door now with the same force Jamie had used at the house, growling and ready to chew her apart. She passed through the drawing room and entered another room near the entryway. As she flipped on the light, her mouth opened wide and she almost choked. There, with nails driven through his body, was one of the servants pegged to the wall, half dead or half alive, and he seemed to be grinning at her through the blood covering his face. At times she let out a loud scream and then ran back to the hallway. She was silenced by the car pulling up the circular Pendleton driveway. She ran to the windows and yanked back the curtains. Jamie and his father were inside the car as it stopped in front of the porch. Fear threatened to overtake her as she raced up for the stairs. The staircase was covered by a cascading river of blood. One of the maids was sprawled over the marble steps with blood pulsing out of her every few seconds. Marta was beyond the point of screaming now, as the abnormal was becoming normal. She raced up the stairs, trying to make it to the top before the dead men entered the mansion. The second floor was also brightly lit. She ran into the high-ceilinged dining room above the drawing room. She stormed through the room, past a fully set table, and out the other exit. But the large outside door had opened below. Jamie and his father were now in the house with her. She had been found out. Jamie and the old man were coming up the winding marble staircase.
"We know you are up there, Marta,"
cried Jamie, his voice reverberating around the mansion.
"Give up now and die like us."
Marta would never give up. She wanted to live more than anything else in the world. Letting go of the doorknob, she sprinted to her right, to the north wing of the large house. She passed through several doors, locking each of them as she entered another part of the house, the part that was to be her husband's quarters, according to Pendleton's grand plan of things. But she knew there'd be no reasoning with her murderous husband when he broke his way inside.
"I can kill you with one blow to your head,"
called Jamie, his voice still sounding loudly throughout every room of the house.
"I will mash your skull and spread your brains onto the floor. You cannot run or hide from me."
Marta waited and waited, trying to figure out what she could do. Finally, she rushed desperately toward the room to her right. Strangely, the television set blasted, with people roaring with laughter from a situation comedy. As she tried to guess her next move, the television screen froze, and in the place of the comedy program was a full, overblown close-up of her husband's face.
"I know where you are. It is just a matter of time,"
he said as he began laughing at her and touching her soul with an unyielding horror. She saw a door to the left of the TV set. The staircase perhaps could lead to the kitchen below and freedom. As the television thundered with Jamie's laughter, she reached out and turned the doorknob. It was her last chance to leave, she thought, and she rushed through the doorway. She had taken but 2 steps down the stairs when she ran into the old man, who had gone around from the other direction. He put his cold, clammy hands around her fragile, smooth neck.
"Die, Marta. Die. Join us. Come forever to die."
She bit at his hand, but it was like he experienced no pain at all. He was not even deterred by her attack. Raising her arms, she struggled fiercely with him. Even at his much older, advancing age, he still had the advantage. The only alternative was to shove him down the stairs. Once pushed, even the old man could not combat the force of gravity. He lost his balance and quickly relinquished his grip on her, but she felt herself going forward with him. She broke her fall by catching the banister with both hands. Her palms were shot full of tiny splinters, but she was able to get to her feet and up the stairs again. Below, Pendleton rolled head over heels down the narrow staircase to the first floor, screaming for his life as his neck snapped. Marta locked the door because she knew he would somehow be back to threaten her. As she turned from the door, Jamie was still on the television set.
Your efforts are useless.
He said, as if he was trying to torment her.
He will be born again to die and butcher your body.
She picked up the rocker and hurled it at the set. The picture tube imploded and sparks flew about the room. The set had been destroyed, but Jamie's face, laughing loudly, was still a wavering image between the broken glass. She covered her mouth at the sight and backed out of the room. It was as if he would destroy her bit by bit before the actual kill, because he knew he had her trapped. The wood from the door was splintering as Marta ran ahead and down through the north wing, not knowing what to expect. There were rooms on both sides as Jamie busted up the door and she ran into the room to her left. This room was used by the servants for sewing and general repairs, but it did have a door in the rear. She locked the outside door. Upon opening the inner door, she found another staircase leading up to the attic. This was the only dark portion of the mansion, and she felt her way upward. Outside the sewing room, Jamie's ubiquitous cursing voice rattled her unsteady nerves, but she continued upward through the darkness.
We know you are in there, Marta. We know. Let us in.
He cried. The boards around her seemed to rumble from the sound. His bloody fists began pummeling the sewing room door, and then he kicked at it furiously. It was as if he finally wanted to get it over with and kill her. She could hear Pendleton now, apparently alive again. He was coming up the kitchen stairway and calling her name. The ruckus grew louder outside the door as she moved upward.
Marta! Marta! Marta!
It was colder up here in this portion of the mansion, and it seemed to affect all the injured portions of her body. It couldn't be much farther, she thought, as she breathed the dusty air. But something blocked her way. Perhaps she'd come to another door or a change in direction of the stairs. Or it could be something else. Her face froze in the darkness as she prepared for the worst. "I know you're there! I know you're there!" she said quickly and raised her hands. No one answered. It had to be an inanimate object. She reached forward, but the object she felt was wet and gushy. She retracted her hand, yet she still had to go forward. She slipped by it, feeling her way along the wall to a light switch. As she flipped it on, the overhead light came on, and she let out a deafening wail. The butler's head was hanging from the ceiling and punctured with dozens of needles from the sewing room below, looking like a wet pincushion. The rest of his body was cast across the stairway in a mutilated mess. She could see the wallpaper smeared with blood, and above her, and the butler's eyes seemed to be watching her every move. She had to get out. The door was unlocked as she pushed her way to the spacious attic. There was a pull chain ahead. She turned and locked the lower staircase door as she pulled the cord. Yet there were no windows in the attic, just a half a dozen louvers along the side walls. She made her way over to the closet louvers and lifted them up with all her remaining strength, but they were nailed shut, and there was a wire mesh embedded over the outside. Now, she reasoned, it was impossible to break through it. Time was running out. Her only option was to run down the 50-foot room. She saw the corner to a series of attic bays over the east wing. It was at that time she heard a low, barely audible growl. Jamie broke through the lower door to the sewing room. Despite the growl, she rushed forward. She had to get out. The room was clear as she sprinted down its length, hurdling the boxes and crates. She pulled at the other light cords as she ran. The lights came on near the east wing entrance. Pendleton's Dobermans appeared from nowhere and blocked the entranceway. They were perched for the kill, their mouths frothing and their sharp incisors outlined in blood. Marta was trapped at both ends. She retreated as the dogs sprang forward. They chased her now as she fell forward to a conglomeration of old sporting equipment. Scrambling, she grasped the handle of a thick baseball bat as the dogs leaped into the air. They were just inches from her, their teeth ready to sink into her flesh. She didn't even look as she let the bat fly. The first dog was knocked unconscious, but the second one rebounded and came at her again. She had no time to bring the bat around, and his teeth sunk into her forearm. He was going to tear her apart like a raw piece of meat, and he was big enough to keep her pinned to the floor. She reached back, grabbing for anything, and got a hold of a dumbbell bar. The Against her own emotions, she let the dog have it once again and then twice. He collapsed to the floor, his eyes glowing with the presence of the alien creatures. As she picked up the bat, she knew she had to get out. She resumed her escape route, running back across the room and turning toward the base to the right. Holding onto the baseball bat, she looked inside. The rooms to the right were indirectly lit by bulbs along the wall, and their rear portions covered with insulation. She ran down the hallway and into the shadows. There were more voices ahead. The rest of the servants, their quarters and rooms behind the drawing room, came out and up the opposite stairs. Like a spinning yo-yo, she darted back to the other, more open room. She had to get out of the mansion, but it looked as if it were all over. Jamie had finally broken through. Pendleton and the children followed him into the attic. Marta smashed the overhead light bulb and ran the other way, but it was no safer there. Far down the end of the hallway, coming out of the darkness, the servants, armed with any weapon they could find, coming at a steady pace. Again, she darted one way and then to the other, but it was pointless. Her luck had run out.
Marta!
Called Jamie in a volume that shook the upper timbers.
Marta!
He repeated. She stood poised with the bat. The servants mumbled as they approached. Their eyes glowing with the creatures from across the universe, creatures that had taken over their bodies, and they were condemned to die over and over again. She did not want to join them. They were all around her now, even the dogs, and they growled and spit with every advancing step. And Jamie led them all, smiling with the thrill of the final quest. "You can't kill me. Don't you see what's happened to you? You've been taken over by these bundles, the creatures from the plant. The universal power has done all this. Can't you see?"
We have joined with them,
said the old man.
so we can live to die. Like it is supposed to be.
Said Jamie. "No, you don't have to, Jamie," she pleaded and looked down at the distorted faces of her two children, filled with vengeance and hatred. "Just tell me why you have to kill, why you must go on killing." But they weren't listening to her words as the circle surrounding her got tighter. A dozen glowing red-framed eyes, all set with one final intention: violent, painful death. "We're not supposed to act like this. We can't live together if we live like this, don't you see? You're not human in your present form. Humans don't have that thing around their eyes. Human beings don't live just to die. There's more to life than that."
You cannot change the inevitable.
Jamie bellowed as he moved ahead of the others. Maybe he wanted to get first crack at her. She raised the bat as she moved around, but he was unfrightened by her threats. She lunged forward and unleashed the wood, mutilating his nose into a bloody stub. Once again, she swung the bat. This time she knocked out his front teeth, but he caught the bat, broke it in two, and cast the pieces across the attic. Then they all moved inward now, and Jamie reached out with his hands. He was going to choke her dead. She could almost feel the air leaving her body as she tried to back up. In a few seconds, she would be like them. "I will not die! I will not die!" she yelled at them. Then she faced them and bared her teeth. It was not as if she didn't fear them. Rather, she was overcome with underlying anger. They wanted her to allow them to take her life. It was all so simple to them. She would die over and over again. But if they wanted her, they were going to have to fight.
Death beckons honey pie.
Laughed Jamie. "You're my husband. You're a human being. Why? Why would you do this?" she yelled.
We all have our reasons for living.
He said as he raised his hands upward.
We have our good sides and our bad sides. Come, Marta, don't you approve of my other face?
He squeezed her windpipe as he fought, but her precious breathing passage was becoming occluded. She squirmed, never wanting to give in to death, and stepped backward with all her might. The weight of her body pressed on the insulation and the plaster and wallboards of the lower rooms. The ceiling broke under the stress, and they all plunged through. Jamie held her throat for only a second as they all went careening down to the second floor. Marta hit the carpet just above the marble staircase, and she was covered with the rubble from above. Jamie, however, had pushed outward, hit the iron banisters, slicing his upper torso lengthwise. She rose in pain and held the railing. Somehow she had caught her own breath and hurried down the stairs, but she was breathing heavily. Just for a second, she stopped at the bottom of the stairway. She felt something on her shoulder. Her parka was splattered with dripping blood from her husband's body. That sparked her into running directly for the drawing room doors. She unlocked the doors and actually rushed outside. In the darkness, she could see, as Pendleton had always intended, a stunning view of St. Argus. Many fires, perhaps 15 or 20, had been already started in various locations of the town. They blazed high into the night, as not only the physical structure of the town was threatened, but the entire social fabric was becoming torn from its foundation. She had to run, flee from the horror. Even with her injuries, she was faster than they were and could keep ahead of them as long as her strength held out. She ran toward the scrub oaks, and this time down the hill. She had gotten away. Only this time he had recovered from another death and was gaining, not losing, strength. The car was unquestionably out of her control now. She was approaching 60 miles an hour along the river road, then 70 miles an hour. The car was just going too fast to control, but she could not stop it and crashed through a barbed wire fence and into a farmer's field. The car plowed deep through the snow like an icebreaker, and its speed was actually increasing. If he was not going to kill her directly, then he would kill her this way. She would end up like the rest of them, with no hope, no future, no life. The farmer's house was only a few hundred yards away, and the car kept moving through the snow. She tried pulling at the keys and actually succeeded in removing them from the ignition. But even with the engine completely off, the car was unaffected. It was on a collision course with the house and the barns ahead. Marta had little choice other than jumping out. She took her clothes off the seat and tucked them around her stomach and bunched up her body. As the snow flew upward from the tires, she thrust open the door, and at an incredible speed she leaped from the car. She tumbled so rapidly she lost consciousness, coming to rest face up in the moonlight, surrounded by over a foot of snow. Yet the car kept going, caught the side of the barn, and then pushed through the wall of the farmhouse. Seconds later, there was a prodigious explosion. The house caught fire by the time Marta sat up, and in just a few minutes, the house was one massive fireball. She felt as if every muscle in her body had been torn apart. Snow was stuffed down her jeans and heavy sweatshirt, and she knew very well, as she looked into the fire, if she hadn't jumped from the car, she, like the people in that house, would be trapped in a fiery hell, destined to emerge to die again. Standing slowly, she held her side. Her ribs were bruised, maybe even broken, and her head was ringing as she tried to orient herself. The lights of the town were to her right, and the clock tower at 12:30. The Pendleton mansion was up the hill, several hundred yards to the left of the clock tower. She found her clothes and quickly shielded herself from the bitter cold. The highway was not far away. The highway was not far away. Her ankle bothered her now from the fall, and she limped through the snow toward the road. In the distance, she could hear mad howling, shots being fired, and people screaming. It was as if the whole town had lost its collective sanity. It was in the center of a war zone. There was no way she could travel that route and hope to stay alive. Once again, she crossed over the highway and stepped into another field. As she limped in pain, she skirted the town in the confusion and slowly made her way around to the base of the Pendleton Hill. She was minutes away from rescuing her children. The Pendleton mansion, white in the moonlight, stared down at her. Every light in the house seemed to be burning extra brightly, as if the old man were holding an extravaganza. Only this gathering threatened to surpass anything that had ever taken place inside that mansion. Staying clear of the asphalt driveway, she pushed herself up the smooth-sloped hill, the mansion disappearing within the trees for a short time. But the glow of the lights lingered above the crest of the hill. She scrambled up the incline, and the mansion rose into view. There appeared to be no one inside, despite the burning lights. She made her way through the scrub oaks and through the intertwining brush and stepped onto the patio. The wind slapped against her, blowing her hood back several times as she walked up to the drawing room windows. The house was indeed empty inside, yet the fire was blazing. She tugged on the door, moving them slightly, but they would not open. As she looked across the room to the marble-tiled entryway, she realized she was going to have to enter the mansion from the front. In just a few moments, she could have her children. She trampled through the snow around the house and past the neatly trimmed bushes to the wood pillars on the front porch. The brass doorknob, cold to the touch, turned as she moved her hand forward. The brass doorknob, cold to the touch, turned easily as she opened the door. The warmer air blew across her face, pushing her brown hair back. She stepped inside, shut the door, and stood on the marble tiles. It was only the second time she had ever been in the mansion. The other time being when Jamie had the final confrontation with his father. Everything was just as she had remembered it. Slowly, she walked down the hallway, looking up at the brightly lit chandelier. She headed toward the north wing. The door to her right, past the drawing room, was closed, but a seal of light surrounded it. The children might be inside. She opened the door quickly. Pendleton's Dobermans on the far side of the room spun around and bared their teeth. They were covered with scattered blood and they were foaming at the mouth, but it was the red glowing circles that caused her to shuffle back. Even animals had not been left out of the carnage. As they sprung through the air, she slammed the door and then locked it. She ran into the hallway and began calling for her children. "Mitchie! Sandy! Mitchie! Sandy!" The dogs clawed at the door now with the same force Jamie had used at the house, growling and ready to chew her apart. She had to find the children now, but they were nowhere in sight. She passed through the drawing room and entered another room near the entryway. As she flipped on the light, her mouth opened wide, she almost choked. There, with nails driven through his body, was one of the servants pegged to the wall, half dead or half alive, and he seemed to be grinning at her through the blood covering his face. For the first time, she let out a loud scream and then ran back to the hallway. "Mitchie! Sandy!" she cried. She was silenced by the car, pulling up the circular Pendleton driveway. She ran to the windows and yanked back the curtains. Jamie and his father were inside the car as it stopped in front of the porch. Fear threatened to overtake her as she raced up for the stairs, all the while calling her children. "Mitchie! Sandy! Mitchie! Sandy!" The staircase was covered by a cascading river of blood. One of the maids was sprawled over the marble steps with blood pulsing out of her every few seconds. Marta was beyond the point of screaming now, as the abnormal was becoming normal. She raced up the stairs, trying to make it to the top before the dead men entered the mansion. The second floor was also brightly lit. She ran into the high-ceilinged dining room above the drawing room. In a frantic search for her children, she stormed through the room, past a fully set table, and out the other exit. But the large outside door had opened below. Jamie and his father were now in the house with her. The doors toward Pendleton's study were closed. She heard a noise from one of the rooms, like the sound of small children playing. It would only be a matter of time before Jamie found her now, and she knew that she had to get the kids out of the mansion. She pushed open the first door. Mitchie and Sandy were playing on the floor with their backs to her. "Why didn't you children answer me? Why didn't you children answer me?" she whispered. "We have to leave here at once." But the children had no sense of urgency. They were not playing with their usual toys. She backed away in sheer terror as they faced her.
"Have you come to die, Mother?"
asked her son in a deep masculine voice. He arose and lifted a club at his mother.
"We want to murder you, Mother,"
said the little daughter, her eyes rolling uncontrollably in her head. "This can't be happening! My own children, my God! What have they done to you?"
"Just let us smash you one time, Mother."
"No, no," said Marta as she backed up.
"You will live to die. You will live the living death,"
grumbled her daughter as she swiped at her mother. Marta, still half believing that they had been killed, froze for an instant, and the little girl smashed her shoulder. She could feel blood seeping through the layers of clothing as she backed up. Her own children were preparing to kill her as they lunged at her. She twisted the doorknob and leaped outside before locking the door. The children kicked and scratched at the inside of the door, but she had to leave them behind now. She had been found out. Jamie and the old man were coming up the winding marble staircase.
"We know you are up there, Marta,"
cried Jamie, his voice reverberating around the mansion.
"Give up now and die like us."
Marta would never give up. She wanted to live more than anything else in the world. Letting go of the doorknob, she sprinted to her right, to the north wing of the large house. She passed through several doors, locking each of them as she entered another part of the house, the part that was to be her husband's quarters, according to Pendleton's grand plan of things. But she knew there'd be no reasoning with her murderous husband when he broke his way inside.
"I can kill you with one blow to your head,"
called Jamie, his voice still sounding loudly throughout every room of the house.
"I will mash your skull and spread your brains onto the floor. You cannot run or hide from me."
Marta waited and waited, trying to figure out what she could do. Finally, she rushed desperately toward the room to her right. Strangely, the television set blasted, with people roaring with laughter from a situation comedy. As she tried to guess her next move, the television screen froze, and in the place of the comedy program was a full, overblown close-up of her husband's face.
"I know where you are. It is just a matter of time,"
he said as he began laughing at her and touching her soul with an unyielding horror. She saw a door to the left of the TV set. The staircase perhaps could lead to the kitchen below and freedom. As the television thundered with Jamie's laughter, she reached out and turned the doorknob. It was her last chance to leave, she thought, and she rushed through the doorway. She had taken but 2 steps down the stairs when she ran into the old man, who had gone around from the other direction. He put his cold, clammy hands around her fragile, smooth neck.
"Die, Marta. Die. Join us. Come forever to die."
She bit at his hand, but it was like he experienced no pain at all. He was not even deterred by her attack. Raising her arms, she struggled fiercely with him. Even at his much older, advancing age, he still had the advantage. The only alternative was to shove him down the stairs. Once pushed, even the old man could not combat the force of gravity. He lost his balance and quickly relinquished his grip on her, but she felt herself going forward with him. She broke her fall by catching the banister with both hands. Her palms were shot full of tiny splinters, but she was able to get to her feet and up the stairs again. Below, Pendleton rolled head over heels down the narrow staircase to the first floor, screaming for his life as his neck snapped. Marta locked the door because she knew he would somehow be back to threaten her. As she turned from the door, Jamie was still on the television set.
Your efforts are useless.
He said, as if he was trying to torment her.
He will be born again to die and butcher your body.
She picked up the children's rocker and hurled it at the set. The picture tube imploded and sparks flew about the room. The set had been destroyed, but Jamie's face, laughing loudly, was still a wavering image between the broken glass. She covered her mouth at the sight and backed out of the room. Inside the central corridor, Jamie and the children were pounding at the final locked door. It was as if he would destroy her bit by bit before the actual kill, because he knew he had her trapped. The wood from the door was splintering as Marta ran ahead and down through the north wing, not knowing what to expect. There were rooms on both sides as Jamie busted up the door and she ran into the room to her left. This room was used by the servants for sewing and general repairs, but it did have a door in the rear. She locked the outside door as the children followed Jamie down the corridor. Upon opening the inner door, she found another staircase leading up to the attic. This was the only dark portion of the mansion, and she felt her way upward. Outside the sewing room, Jamie's ubiquitous cursing voice rattled her unsteady nerves, but she continued upward through the darkness.
We know you are in there, Marta. We know. Let us in.
He cried, and the boards around her seemed to rumble from the sound. His bloody fists began pummeling the sewing room door, and then he kicked at it furiously. It was as if he finally wanted to get it over with and kill her. She could hear Pendleton now, apparently alive again. He was coming up the kitchen stairway and calling her name. The ruckus grew louder outside the door as she moved upward.
Marta! Marta! Marta!
It was colder up here in this portion of the mansion, and it seemed to affect all the injured portions of her body. It couldn't be much farther, she thought, as she breathed the dusty air. But something blocked her way. Perhaps she'd come to another door or a change in direction of the stairs. Or it could be something else. Her face froze in the darkness as she prepared for the worst. I know you're there! I know you're there! She said quickly and raised her hands. No one answered. It had to be an inanimate object. She reached forward, but the object she felt was wet and gushy. She retracted her hand, yet she still had to go forward. She slipped by it, feeling her way along the wall to a light switch. As she flipped it on, the overhead light came on, and she let out a deafening wail. The butcher's head was hanging on a rope from the ceiling and punctured with dozens of needles from the sewing room below, looking like a wet pincushion. The rest of his body was cast across the stairway in a mutilated mess. She could see the wallpaper smeared with blood, and above her and the butler's eyes seemed to be watching her every move. She had to get out. The door was unlocked as she pushed her way to the spacious attic. There was a pull chain ahead. She turned and locked the lower staircase door as she pulled the cord. Yet there were no windows in the attic, just a half a dozen louvers along the side walls. There were old toy chests, games, articles from times gone by, and all scattered around the upper spaces of the mansion. She made her way over to the closet louvers and lifted them up with all her remaining strength, but they were nailed shut. And there was a wire mesh embedded over the outside. Now, she reasoned, it was impossible to break through it. Time was running out. Her only option was to run down the 50-foot room. She saw the corner to a series of attic bays over the east wing. It was at that time she heard a low, barely audible growl. Jamie broke through the lower door to the sewing room. Despite the growl, she rushed forward. She had to get out. The room was clear as she sprinted down its length, hurdling the boxes and crates. She pulled at the other light cords as she ran. The lights came on near the east wing entrance. Pendleton's Dobermans appeared from nowhere and blocked the entranceway. They were perched for the kill, their mouths frothing and their sharpened incisors outlined in blood. Marta was trapped at both ends. She retreated as the dogs sprang forward. They chased her now as she fell forward to a conglomeration of old sporting equipment. Scrambling, she grasped the handle of a thick baseball bat as the dogs leaped into the air. They were just inches from her, their teeth ready to sink into her flesh. She didn't even look as she let the bat fly. The first dog was knocked unconscious, but the second one rebounded and came at her again. She had no time to bring the bat around, and his teeth sunk into her forearm. He was going to tear her apart like a raw piece of meat, and he was big enough to keep her pinned to the floor. She reached back, grabbing for anything, and got a hold of a dumbbell bar. Against her own emotions, she let the dog have it once again and then twice. He collapsed to the floor, his eyes glowing with the presence of the alien creatures. As she picked up the bat, she knew she had to get out. She resumed her escape route, running back across the room and turning toward the base to the right. Holding onto the baseball bat, she looked inside. The rooms to the right were indirectly lit by bulbs along the wall, and their rear portions covered with insulation. She ran down the hallway and into the shadows. There were more voices ahead. The rest of the servants, their quarters and rooms behind the drawing room, came out and up the opposite stairs. Like a spinning yo-yo, she darted back to the other, more open room. She had to get out of the mansion, but it looked as if it were all over. Jamie had finally broken through. Pendleton and the children followed him into the attic. Marta smashed the overhead light bulb and ran the other way, but it was no safer there. Far down the end of the hallway, coming out of the darkness, the servants, armed with any weapon they could find, coming at a steady pace. Again, she darted one way and then to the other, but it was pointless. Her luck had run out.
Marta!
Called Jamie, in a volume that shook the upper timbers.
Marta!
He repeated. She stood poised with the bat. The servants mumbled as they approached. Their eyes glowing with the creatures from across the universe, creatures that had taken over their bodies, and they were condemned to die over and over again. She did not want to join them. They were all around her now, even the dogs, and they growled and spit with every advancing step. And Jamie led them all, smiling with the thrill of the final quest. "You can't kill me. Don't you see what's happened to you? You've been taken over by these bundles, the creatures from the plant. The universal power has done all this. Can't you see?"
We have joined with them,
said the old man.
so we can live to die. Like it is supposed to be.
Said Jamie. "No, you don't have to, Jamie," she pleaded and looked down at the distorted faces of her two children, filled with vengeance and hatred. "Just tell me why you have to kill, why you must go on killing." But they weren't listening to her words as the circle surrounding her got tighter. A dozen glowing red-framed eyes, all set with one final intention: violent, painful death. "We're not supposed to act like this. We can't live together if we live like this, don't you see? You're not human in your present form. Humans don't have that thing around their eyes. Human beings don't live just to die. There's more to life than that."
You cannot change the inevitable.
Jamie bellowed as he moved ahead of the others. Maybe he wanted to get first crack at her. She raised the bat as she moved around, but he was unfrightened by her threats. She lunged forward and unleashed the wood, mutilating his nose into a bloody stub. Once again, she swung the bat. This time she knocked out his front teeth, but he caught the bat, broke it in two, and cast the pieces across the attic. Then they all moved inward now, and Jamie reached out with his hands. He was going to choke her dead. She could almost feel the air leaving her body as she tried to back up. In a few seconds, she would be like them. "I will not die! I will not die!" she yelled at them. Then she faced them and bared her teeth. It was not as if she didn't fear them. Rather, she was overcome with underlying anger. They wanted her to allow them to take her life. It was all so simple to them. She would die over and over again. But if they wanted her, they were going to have to fight.
Death beckons, honey pie.
Laughed Jamie. "You're my husband. You're a human being. Why? Why would you do this?" she yelled. "And my children." "We all have our reasons for living," he said as he raised his hands upward. "We have our good sides and our bad sides. Come, Marta, don't you approve of my other face?" He squeezed her windpipe as he fought, but her precious breathing passage was becoming occluded. She squirmed, never wanting to give in to death, and stepped backward with all her might. The weight of her body pressed on the insulation and the plaster and wallboards of the lower rooms. The ceiling broke under the stress, and they all plunged through. Jamie held her throat for only a second as they all went careening down to the second floor. Marta hit the carpet just above the marble staircase, and she was covered with the rubble from above. Jamie, however, had pushed outward, hit the iron banisters, slicing his upper torso lengthwise. She rose in pain and held the railing. Somehow she had caught her own breath and hurried down the stairs, but she was breathing heavily. Just for a second, she stopped at the bottom of the stairway. She felt something on her shoulder. Her parka was splattered with dripping blood from her husband's body. That sparked her into running directly for the drawing room doors. She unlocked the doors and actually rushed outside. In the darkness, she could see, as Pendleton had always intended, a stunning view of St. Argus. Many fires, perhaps 15 or 20, had been already started in various locations of the town. They blazed high into the night, as not only the physical structure of the town was threatened, but the entire social fabric was becoming torn from its foundation. Marta Pendleton was dumbfounded. She had no idea where she'd go now, but she had to run, flee from the horror. Even with her injuries, she was faster than they were and could keep ahead of them as long as her strength held out. Again, she ran toward the scrub oaks, and this time down the hill. She had gotten away. As she stepped away from the hill, she could feel immovable, unfathomable forces grasping around her body and dragging her toward the hill. No, no, I don't want to go there. No. She was dragged up through the tree. She was dragged toward the driveway, and as she fought to run down the hill, her body was taken along the asphalt and marched against her will toward the mansion. Marta fell forward and was dragged up the asphalt toward the mansion, and was dragged along the drive, was dragged through the snow along the drive and up toward the mansion. Then her body was turned upright, and she struggled to run back down the hill, but was spun around in midair and drawn toward the front door. The huge wooden door opened toward the inside of the mansion, and the light crashed, and the light shone over her body. "No, no, I won't join you, no!" But she was pulled forward into the warmer air. She was pulled forward into the warmer air and across the tiles. All movement returned to her body, but the door slammed behind her, and when she went to open the brass doorknob, the door was secured shut. She moved up to each window, pushing them one by one, but they wouldn't budge. And then she turned and faced the inside of the huge mansion. My Other Face, Chapter 19. Thou shalt not kill. Sixth Commandment. Weissman had increased his speed to 40 miles an hour and was just pulling around the bend of the southern mountains. His eyes were sore, and the constant squinting had given him a slight headache. Although the snow had stopped, the hilly roads were essentially unplowed and very slippery. He looked at his watch. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The Porsche, in low gear, took the inclines well. Weissman reached the top of the hill. He would head for the hospital and get Marta, and then over to Mrs. Dooley to get the children before he got out of town. But as he came around the ledges, he couldn't believe what he saw. He shifted into second gear, confused by the fires burning all over the town. He immediately thought of Jamie and what was going on, even though he had reasoned it out a few hours before. He wondered if the town was at the mercy of forces from the power plant. He sped down the highway at over 70 miles an hour, whizzing by the farmhouses, the frozen swamps, and into the town. The flames danced all around, and there were people in the streets, scattered at first as he slowed, all of them walking in a strange manner, set to murder. He could see the fiery red glows as he slowed and passed the people. And now he was very much aware how Marta had been right all along. Weissman brought the Porsche to a crawling speed now, weaving around the wandering people who banged on the car. They were deliberately trying to throw themselves in front of the car. A bottle smashed against the grill of the Porsche, and someone cracked the passenger window with a sizable rock. He kept going until he hit a woman by accident as she leaped on the hood of the car. He jammed on the brakes, stopping suddenly. The wild and frenzied citizens of St. August converged on his car. He skidded away and headed toward the clinic. He had to take Marta out of this town and get her away for good. Marta was running on the campus of St. August College. Since the college was outside of the town proper, there weren't any people in view. She could, however, hear screaming and gunshots toward town, and she was nearing the point of exhaustion. Her body had been injured so many times she felt as though she couldn't take another step. She made her way up to the administration building, pulling open the glass door, and fell into the lobby. For the first time that evening, she actually felt safe. She let her heart pound against the linoleum until it leveled off to a normal rate. It was all so quiet inside the building, she could hardly believe the bedlam that was taking place in the town outside. Bernie, I have to get to Bernie. He has to be back by now. He'll go to the clinic if he makes it. Oh, God. Bernie, you have to go to Mrs. Dooley's house. I don't even know where Mrs. Dooley's house is. You have to get my kids. You have to protect them from this madness, Bernardo. Got a call. Tell them, Bernardo. I'm right out here. He'll get me away. Bernie will get me away from death. She pushed her way upward, grabbing onto a chair. Hobbling noticeably, she made her way over to the public phone and reached into her Parker. The dime felt like a 20-pound weight as she dropped it in the slot. She dialed the clinic, but when they answered the line, she could hear people shouting and moaning in pain. The madness was spreading. Hello, she cried.
Nurse Hoyle.
This is Marta Pendleton. There was no reaction. I said this is Marta Pendleton.
Look, honey, I got a room full of injured people, half dead and half alive, and more upstairs, unless you have something vital to tell me.
Bernie Weissman. Is Bernie Weissman there?
No, Weissman isn't here.
When he comes in, I can't hear you, she said above the noise. I said, when Weissman comes to the clinic, tell him I'm in the administration building at the college.
Yes, I'll tell him. I have to go. This place is a mess.
She said, and the line went dead. Marta slowly put the receiver back on the hook, and in the middle of the eerie silence, people were now out on the grass and they could see her inside. She had thought she was so safe. Now she was on the run again. Her life was being challenged by yet more people who had been taken over by the bundles. She whisked herself around and ran down the stairs into the basement. Hiding there was her only objective now, because she was too tired and in too much pain to continue fleeing. She whisked herself around and ran down the stairs to the basement. Hiding was her only objective now, because she was far too tired and in too much pain to continue fleeing. There was an outside entrance in the basement offices, but people were now milling around that entrance too. She entered the underground tunnel that led to the college's 26-story library. The sound of trampling footsteps rumbled across the ceiling. She ran wildly as the tunnel twisted and turned deep underground. All was clear until she rounded the corner by a series of supply closets. Two men struggled with each other about 20 feet ahead. They punched, shoved, and kicked as they moved right into the closet. Soon they fought their way back into the corridor, but one of them had a bottle in his hands. He retreated and had time enough to unscrew the cap. She could read the label, even at that distance. It had a skull and crossbones under the words hydrochloric acid. No! Shouted the other man, but there was no stopping the man with the bottle, and he hurled the open bottle right at the man's head. The acid erupted in a spray of skin-eating bubbles. The man screamed in unbelievable agony as he ran right toward Marta. Scorched segments of his flesh hung from his cheekbones. He reached out for Marta, but his hands had been eaten away, with only the bony appendages left to rip off her parka. She twisted out of it as he fell to the floor. His eyes were now extremely bright, and she could see the healing process was beginning already. The creatures, the bundles, had moved directly from the Amenti region into his brain. His eyes glowed red now, like the others. But she had other things to worry about. The second man saw an opportunity and rushed her. She turned into one of the side classrooms, scouring past the desks and chairs as he chased her in the dark. Even with her diminished strength, she had the ability to outwit him. Circling back to the other entrance, she moved into the underground corridor and toward the library. The attackers were underground now. 5 men and a teenage girl rounded the corner behind her. They were all covered with blood and yelling viciously. When the man came out of the classroom, they sprung on him, violently tearing him to shreds. That gave Marta the time she needed to cross the underground corridor. She bolted the door shut, and for a while, she appeared to be safe. Weissman had evaded most of the street attackers, but his nice sports car was dented, with most of the windows cracked. He raced the car through the side streets and onto the hospital grounds. Even at that point, there were people meandering around like stragglers after a sporting event. He skidded up to the emergency room door and hurried inside. When he opened the door, the people spread over the emergency room floor. Blood was everywhere, splattered on the tiles of the walls and spread over the green linoleum. Weissman hopped over the bodies on his way to the basement stairs. People were even in the stairwell, moaning or fighting as he leaped down the steps, knocking people flat over as he pushed open the broken basement doors. The situation inside the clinic below was no different from above. Doctors had gathered in the middle of the corridor by the nurses' station. People cried for help all around them. The doctors seemed involved with something. Weissman pushed his way to the center of the activity. They had gathered around a young man whose head had been sliced open from ear to ear by an oncoming truck. It was a gouge so wide, so deep that no human being could actually survive it. But the doctors seemed spellbound. Underneath, where the brain tissue was normally present, was a huge bundle of light, center perfect within the man's skull. It was extremely bright light. Faded to orange and then to red outside the rim of the skull. What astounded the doctors was the fact that the tissues on the outside of the man's head were healing. "I've never seen anything like it," said the flabbergasted Andrews. He turned to Casey, shaking his head in disbelief. "What's going on here? Is this town gone mad?" Another man, a technician, came running from a side room with a microscope slide in his hands. He had found something else. "There's nothing. No cells, no tissue, nothing at all. Just a series of faint electromagnetic waves. It's like it doesn't exist at all." "Well, that's impossible," said Andrews as he took the slide. But the time for reflection was short-lived, as a crowd of angry people, who had been taken over by the bundles, came downstairs from the upper floor. They had somehow got automatic weapons and sprayed the glass door with bullets. Weissman dove over the counter and behind the nurse's station as other men scattered. Andrews was hit first, several dozen bullets ripping apart his green surgical coat and into bloody holes. He hit the floor and the blood splattered onto the wall. Valiantly he attempted to crawl, but he must have lost most of the blood in his body. He was now yet another victim of the madness. Then the crowd confronted the doctors and staff directly. "Where is she? Where's Marta?" "Well, she ran out," cried the nurse over the uproar. "What? Where did she go?" asked Weissman. "The school administration building. She called here." "Thank you," said Weissman as he arose. Now he was angry. No matter what it took, he was going to find her. He leaped over the desk and into the corridor. As he made a break for the front door, a man caught him by the shoulder. Weissman spun around and decked him with a single unorthodox punch and ran up the stairs to the first floor holding his bloody knuckles. He wasn't pleased by what he saw upstairs. The people who seemed dead just minutes before were now recovered, and they had joined the other townspeople and doctors in a weird assemblage in the emergency room. As he entered the corridor, they seemed to move in one collective motion, and now they had seen him. Without a second thought, he took several steps in the other direction, but people were gathering down the far end of the corridor. From both sides, they began to close in on him like grapes going to the press. Weissman, who in past years was content to retreat to the bottle, was not afraid to fight to the end. He rushed to the telephone and ripped the receiver from the wall. They were all cursing him in low, gurgling tones. That didn't frighten him. Undauntedly, he began swinging the receiver by the cord. His mind flashed back. He was a child again in the heart of the city. They were playing the game Red Rover, and he had to break through the opposing side's barricade. Only these people in the emergency room were playing for keeps. They didn't understand what he was doing. He ran forward with a rebel yell as he swung his weapon. 3 of them were knocked to the floor. He kicked, pinched, and used the receiver to crunch them out of his path. One of them wielded a knife right into his thigh. He made it through the door, holding his side as he ran forward. The cold air stung the wound as he stood under the canopy. But he could still walk, and almost tripping over a metal pipe, he walked away from the hospital. It would be a formidable weapon, he thought, as he returned to the canopy to pick it up. He tapped the cold metal against his hand as he headed for his Porsche. The college was only 2 miles away. He could only hope that Marta had survived the onslaught. Marta sat against several filing cabinets in the base of the library. She caught her breath momentarily, but the attackers were pushing against the corridor doors. There seemed to be no hope for her. She was about to give up, even if she got out of the building. There'd be 100 or more confrontation with thousands of mass murderers who now roam the streets of St. August. If it would only end. But that was an impossibility at this point. They were all geared to live and die in an eternal hell. At least she had a few minutes reprieve before the next onslaught. There was a noise in the upstairs room. Marta sat up quickly, getting to her feet, and squatted behind the reading tables. The lights came on brightly, and she definitely heard footsteps. Coming down the stairway was Harriet DuPont, her face bruised and bloody. But she walked without pain, as if the injuries were only a one-dimensional image. Marta, still tied to her old memories of her mother and conditioning, leaped to her feet and called out for her mother. She needed her mother like she did when she was a child, and Harriet's head snapped to the right. But her glowing eyes became affixed to her daughter. She said nothing and evidenced the same cunning smile as Jamie. "Oh, Mother! Mother, help me, Mother!" Mother was in no mood to lend a helping hand unless it meant the death of her daughter. She waddled down the stairs, staring at Marta as she went straight to the desk in front of the stairs. Like a mindless machine, she opened the drawer and pulled out a long, silver letter opener. Marta backed against the bookshelves along the wall. Now, more people were breaking down the door to the underground corridor. And to go forward, she faced the unbelievable prospect of fighting her own mother. "Mother, get back! Get back!" Marta cried as she took a step forward. But the older woman had great resolve and continued to come after her daughter. "Please put that down! Mother!" she pleaded as the doors rattled.
"You are my daughter,"
said Harriet. She smiled briefly and then spoke.
"You will get the death you deserve. I hate you, Marta. You will live to die."
Marta could hardly think straight as her mother uttered such debasing words. She ran forward, knowing that inside that woman was not really her mother. Her mother had ceased to exist as a human being when Jamie had killed her at the farmhouse. Something else had taken her over. Mrs. DuPont held the letter opener up in the air, jabbing it to the left, and then jabbing it to the right as Marta tried to pass. Marta bit her lip and psyched herself for the attack. She rushed forward as the lady swung the letter opener again. Marta pushed her to the floor on the follow-through. The older woman swung the opener again, this time embedding it deep into the carpet. Marta tried to rush by, but the woman blocked her path with the opener. Marta reached for the opener, and the two women started to struggle. They rolled across the floor, each trying to gain control of the opener. But Marta had youth on her side. She bent the knife upward, closer and closer to her mother's throat. Marta knew if she relinquished her grip, her mother would kill her in a second. "No, Mother! Stop this! Stop this!"
"Allow yourself to die in pain,"
said Mrs. DuPont. The letter opener was on the verge of piercing her mother's throat, and Marta knew she had the strength to push it all the way through. "I can't do this!" yelled Marta as she couldn't kill her mother despite her changed morphology. She let the knife move downward to the carpet and then rolled away. The lady struck again, but Marta had gotten to her feet, and none too soon as the mob broke through the corridor doors. Marta ran up the lobby of the library, and she rushed for the revolving doors. She was not going through because there were more people outside, and when they saw her, they moved toward the entrance of the towering library. Marta retreated inward, toward the elevators in the core of the building. As she pounded on the elevator door, nothing happened. They were breaking the outside glass and entering the lobby now. She had no choice other than to climb the stairs. It was a matter of despair and panic, a move that would leave her totally pinned within the library. As she rushed upward, they slowly and methodically poured into the building, looking for another victim for their solitary aims. Marta could see the faces imprinted in her mind as she struggled to get to the second floor. Hundreds and thousands of them, all unemotional and constrained, all intent on her destruction. The door to the second floor was constructed of a thick metal for fire purposes, and Marta opened it gradually. She did not want to run into another group of them. Slinking inside, she shut the heavy door and locked it solidly. It would be some time before they broke through the thick metal. but she was too frazzled to think ahead, and she stumbled across the floor. Survival was the only thing that mattered, and nothing else. Not even Bernie Weissman meant anything to her as she lay sprawled across the rug. Live. I've got to live, that's all. Simple and clear. Living is the only answer. I know that. To be human is to live and not to think of eventual death. Doesn't matter. Death happens, and that's that. Thinking about it and fearing it accomplishes nothing but despair. I have to live no matter how bad it gets. Just to live. The peace of being alive. Holding each day's most simple treasures in the palm of my hand, and I never knew the meaning. The simple things once forgotten are so dear to me now, the things I will never sense again, because they are going to kill me now, just like they killed Jamie, Sandy, and Mitchie. I will be like them, without meaning, with no purpose other than the brutal starkness of perpetual death. She continued her thoughts out loud. I will never know the subtle beauty of the morning sun breaking onto another day on earth. Instead, I will be filled with the death. Instead, I will be filled with death and spread the death with my human hands. I will have the human body, but I will never know what it means to be human. Now they began pummeling the door. It was still holding firm, but it would eventually give way, and she would have to find somewhere to run. Weissman spun the Porsche around the narrow streets of the college. He knew he could probably drive the car right out of St. August and into freedom. But he needed to find Marta, even if it meant putting his own life on the line. She had never really explicitly said that she loved him, and he wasn't sure she ever would. But he was willing to face it all, no matter what she did or how she treated him. He couldn't help his actions. He loved her. Hastings' cruiser was parked outside the administration building. There were not very many people in the area. Perhaps there was some control now to this madness. He pulled right in back of the cruiser, convinced that Hastings could help him stop the deluge. Grabbing a hold of the pipe, he ran from the Porsche and into the administration building. Without that pipe, he would be at the mercy of the mob. Hastings! He yelled as he stepped inside the battered building. Hastings! He cried again, but there was no answer. Weissman held the pipe in both hands as he ran down the stairs into the basement. The corridors were carpeted with bodies that were quickly renewing themselves. Half-alive corpses reached for his legs as he raced by them. He darted through the corridors that led to the underground tunnel into the library. Hastings stood at the end of the tunnel. His gun was drawn, and he was looking into the reading room of the library basement. Hastings! He cried once more. Hastings motioned him forward, and Weissman ran the length of the corridor. The chief's hair was spread over his head as if he had just awoken, and he had a large bruise on his cheek. This is crazy, he yelled as Weissman came up to him. Are you all right, Dan? Asked Weissman. Oh yeah, I'm just great, he scoffed. I guess your friend was right after all. It's not important now, Dan. What the hell's causing all this? The whole town... It's the power plant. Old man Pendleton. He did something to the time and space around the plant. Now how do you know that? I asked questions, Dan. I talked to a physics professor in Concord. They're using something called universal... Hastings fired the gun at a man with a broken bottle who collapsed midway down the corridor. Only 2 bullets left, Bernie, Hastings told him. Dan, where's Marta? Where is she? I don't know. Look, if you say it's the plant that's causing all this, then we should get over there and destroy the damn place. I agree, but I'm getting to Marta first. Don't be a fool, Weissman. Let's get to the plant. That in itself is risky enough. Don't go looking for the girl. I'm going. She must have come this way. Weissman, why do you always have to be so damn stubborn? 3 more attackers advanced from the reading room. Without thinking, Hastings unloaded the chamber of his gun. 2 of them dropped to the carpet, and Weissman ran ahead, leveling the 3rd man with the pipe. Come on, Hastings, let's go! We have to stay together now. We may be the only ones left, he said as he ran through the reading room. Yes, I know that, said the chief as he followed. Up the stairs. commanded Weissman as Hastings threw the gun across the floor. There were several of them milling around the library lobby. Weissman swung the pipe with reckless abandon, and Hastings used his bare hands. They made their way through the jagged window glass and out into the night. "Marta! Marta!" Weissman called in vain. "How the hell are you going to find her?" demanded Hastings as he surveyed the campus. "Look at this place. I've got to find her, even if I have to search this whole town. Oh, boy," he said as Weissman began running toward an adjacent building. "This is the English department building, if I remember correctly." "You're not going in there, are you?" "Yes, and so are you. I'll go in the front, you go in the back, and we'll meet out here." "Not wise," said Hastings, shaking his head. Several groups of people had spotted them and were slowly advancing toward the two men. "If you want to stay here, then go ahead," said Weissman as he ran to the back of the building. Marta had gotten to her feet on the second floor. They were thrashing at the metal door. She ran through the second floor rooms, desperately searching for a way out. On the far side, she found a second stairwell surrounding the elevator shafts. The staircase spiraled upward for 26 floors to the top of the building. It was lined with graffiti up its white walls, just like when she went to school here. As she climbed upward, the memories of years ago came flying back, and memories of Jamie. She had never envisioned, when she had carried her books up these stairs, that she would someday be running for her life in the very same place. It was hopeless now. She had no weapons, no defense, and no way to get down. She could only listen to her instincts telling her to run, 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 get away. No matter what the cost, get away. It was unusually quiescent toward the top of the building. With only the sound of her footsteps and heavy breathing, she opened the door to the 26th floor. She was safe, but absolutely taking no chances. Her security was only as good as the strength of the door. After locking it, she pushed the empty metal stacks back toward the door. In a matter of minutes, she had wedged the stacks between the door and the outside wall. Unless Jamie, with his superior force, came up the stairs, she would probably be able to hold them off. The elevator doors were wide open, however, as she pulled a bracket off the stacks. Quickly, she ran over and pounded at the elevator switch. The switch became dislodged and she hacked the wires away. She had effectively cut off another means of their entry. From the window, she could see the entire town below. The hospital was in flames now, as well as a slew of houses leading to the center. The town itself had assumed an eerie orange glow from the central blaze. Maybe the town would be repaired, she thought, but it would burn again and again and again, just like the station wagon in the farmhouse. Hell, hell, it's hell. Can this really be happening? Just from that one area under the plant, can it really be true? Beings, tiny, incomprehensible beings, coming across time and space. What kind of a race are they? What kind of a world can they have? And Weissman, where is Bernie? He must be back here by now, if he's not dead. Bernie! Bernie! She yelled out and started to cry. In the solitude, all her emotions came to the surface. The terror weekend, the massive death. All the people of the town are dead. My children, part of all these things, these bundles. Mother and father dead. Don't they understand what they're doing to us? This isn't the way we're supposed to be. What kind of a race are they? Oh God, they're coming. They're coming to kill me. They're coming to kill me. Help me. Somebody help me. They began smashing the door. Minutes passed and the door was still holding. I've outsmarted you, she cried as the tears rolled down her cheeks. You can't break it. Go ahead and try. You can't do it. You can't. She could hear her father's voice.
We have come for you, Marta.
Shouted Albert DuPont as the door began to give way.
Join us, Marta. Join us, Marta,
said her brother Ben. Marta raced for the metal stairs that led to the roof. They were attached to the ceiling and she pulled them down. She hurried up the metal hatchway, pushing it upward, and the freezing air came rushing inside. She had crawled through and was onto the roof. Then she shut it tight, pulled the lever, and locked it. She ran across the slippery gravel of the roof and made her way to the edge. 27 stories below, she could see bodies scattered around the campus. Those who were functioning had not stopped fighting. The place was one big battlefield. "Help me! Help me!" she called. Hastings, who had come to the front steps of the English building, looked upward. She saw a solitary figure calling in the night. "It's her!" he said as he turned and stepped inside. "Weissman! Weissman!" There was a doorway to the roof in the center of the building. She could hear them thrashing at it, and they were beginning to work on the hatchway. The end seemingly had come for her so many times before, yet she had gotten away. She could only stand there and await her fate. The top door, with each thud, she could visualize the blunt end crushing her face. Maybe she shouldn't give him the chance to smash her into unconsciousness. She could end it all before they even came to the roof. The fall might be so severe that the bundles might not be able to repair her body. She looked at the hatchway and then over to the door. Slowly, she inched her way closer and closer to the edge of the library roof. The mighty air currents threatened to lift her aloft. "No, I'm not giving up. I will not give in to them. I'll fight them. I'll fight them if I have to stand here with my bare hands." She stepped back and faced the door. The force was almost insurmountable as they broke through. The look of death resided in their glowing eyes, like the glare of the fox who has his prey backed into the corner. A man whom she had never seen stepped forward. In his hands was a saber sword, perhaps stolen from a collection at the college. His face was covered with an oozing pus from cracked blisters.
Are you ready to die?
He asked, and he waved the sword around his head.
Yes, you will. You will know life in death.
"You people are crazy," she said as she backed up. Step by step, the rest of the group moved with her. From the air currents, she could sense she was only a few feet away from the edge of the building.
Don't you dare resist now,
cried the man with the sword. He held it upward, the blade glistening in the moonlight. "Leave me alone! I will not die!"
But you will die.
He told her as they all circled around her. It was as if they were tempting her to experience the exhilaration of her own death. They had elevated death not only to a form of worship, but necessity. And the heels of her shoes were already over the edge of the building. Just a strong gust of wind could end it all.
Death will be welcome.
"No!" cried a voice from behind. Hastings, carrying a massive wooden club, emerged from the doorway. He yelled wildly as he ran toward them. They spun away from Marta and toward the man who seemed even more vicious than they were. Hastings broke the circle and knocked several of them to the roof.
You beckon death,
cried the man with the saber sword as he raised it again. Hastings was proficient in his moves. He hit the sword right from the man's hands and thrust the club into his stomach. Using it as a ramrod, he ran the man right over the edge of the building. Marta jaunted forward just as Weissman came through the doorway. "Marta!" he said as Hastings pulled her forward. "You saved my life, Bernie!" But they hit Hastings from behind. He turned with the club in his hand and fought them as Marta ran to Weissman. They all wrestled precariously toward the edge, and Weissman, lifting up the pipe, rushed to help the chief. Hastings threw them off to the side. The other two men drove him right to the edge of the building. Weissman dove through the air, his fingertips grabbing the back of Hastings' shoes. But the chief and the two men careened over the edge of the library roof and out of sight. "Oh, God! God, no!" said Weissman from the roof. "Bernie!" she cried as she ran over to him. "I had him! I had his shoes!" said the teary-eyed Weissman. "I could have saved him, Marta! One more second and I would have saved him! He's dead, Bernie! He's dead! He's gone!" Weissman turned as a man next to him lurched toward his neck. He batted him away. Once on his feet, he picked up the saber sword. "Mitchie and Sandy." "Okay, Marta, we're going over to Mrs. Dooley's right now. Then we'll go out to the plant." "The plant, Bernie? Let's just get the hell out of here." "No, we have to stop this, Marta," he said as he took her by the hand and led her below. They ran from the first floor elevator. The lobby was mostly clear of attackers, but They were able to skirt around the attackers as they move outside. People were dying and being revitalized all around. And when they reached the other side of the administration building, close to 20 people were bashing at Hastings' cruiser. "I'll go around the other side," he said, giving her the keys to the Porsche. "When they come after me, get in the Porsche and drive by them. I'll get in. Don't be afraid. Just keep moving slowly. You can always go faster than they can." She nodded and slowly moved to the right. Weissman, brandishing the sword, began taunting them as he circled to the left. "Hey, I'm right here. You want me dead? Then come get me." They stopped what they were doing and directed their attentions to Weissman. Slowly, in short, jerky motions, they came at him. In the meantime, Marta ran down the sidewalk to the Porsche and got in the car. That's right, exclaimed Weissman as he backed up. Come on. Marta whipped the car around the cruiser. Weissman ran ahead like a runner in a relay race, trying to catch the baton. Marta drove up on the snow, pushing open the passenger side door as she neared the running Weissman. He fought off another attacker, thrusting the sword through the attacker's abdomen. Another man leaped onto the moving car. As she spun across the snow, Weissman maneuvered himself inside the Porsche. They moved back on the road and pulled away from the college. But the violence continued throughout the town. The only way to put an end to it all would be to destroy the universal power plant itself. Mrs. Dooley refused to leave her back bedroom on the small hill away from the road. Marta hugged Mitchie and Sandy, and Weissman lifted them into the air and down into the Porsche. They quickly headed out the side roads out of town. The power plant had been running at full capacity when it had only been designed for short-term use. Despite Minos's late adjustments, the entire system was on overload and threatened to rip apart. With the kids in Weissman's lap, Marta drove the Porsche down the river road at an incredible speed. As the plant was in the first stages of breaking down, the ground began to rumble as if a devastating earthquake was about to take place. She had to slow the car just enough to be able to keep it on the road. There were other signs of the pending disaster. The plant, visible in the distance, was exhuming huge amounts of steam and smoke into the air. Sections of the lower building seemed to be crumbling, and the river was beginning to be diverted from its course along the lower lying areas. "What's happening, Bernie?" she asked as they both looked ahead. "Head for the highway, now!" But she couldn't move the car. It must have been Jamie somewhere in the town, and he must have taken over the car's mobility. It was not like before when he boosted the car's speed out of control. This time he was slowly drawing the car into the flames in the center of town. He must have surrounded the car with the force, and they were unable to get out. The ground moved violently. Whole sections of asphalt came thrusting upward, but the car moved either around or over them like a magnet being drawn to a stronger source. The Porsche moved through the side streets of St. Argus, moving backwards as Weissman banged the saber against the glass. He slowly stopped his attempt at escape as the car entered the center of town. The square in the center of St. Argus was burning like the gates of hell. Every building in town was aflame, and around the outskirts hundreds of people had gathered, with more coming in from other parts of the town. The Porsche was dragged off the road and onto the snow under the rockery. Standing atop the rockery like a conquering king, Jamie Pendleton spread his arms over the throng.
"The death!
He said as the Porsche doors sprung off the hinges and onto the snow.
The death has arrived for now."
They had no choice but to get out of the car. Weissman got out of the car and grabbed the two children in his arms and moved up to Marta. With his power, Jamie pulled them outward and into the snow. The ground rumbled beneath them, and the heat from the fires melted the snow all around. From the sides, all the people began to close in on them, led by the DuPont family. Hastings, who had died at the base of the library, led a group on their left and was personally yelling and cursing the only two humans left alive. The only notable missing, strangely enough, was the perpetrator of the entire madness, James Pendleton I.
"Flames of hell burn brightly in St. Argus!"
cried a voice from the top of the bell tower in the church steeple. McAllister apparently had merged with the creatures and had tied a rope from the top beam. At the other end of that rope was a hangman's noose. He stuck his head inside and tightened the knot. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pride of the arrogant. I will lay low the haughtiness of the ruthless. I will make men more rare than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth shall be shaken out of its place, in the wrath of the Lord of hosts in the day of his fierce anger. With his final words, the Reverend leaped from the steeple, and the rope broke apart against his windpipe. The earth was indeed shaking. Jamie's patience was at an end.
Let your deadly nightmare begin,
shouted Jamie. Weissman and Marta could not move from the spot in front of the rockery. Jamie was not going to let them go as the mob closed in on them. Each person seemed to be armed with a club, bottle, rock, or an effective weapon of death, and their collective shouting only added to the feeling that a painful death lurked just ahead. Marta was hit first, driven to the ground by a club, and Weissman felt the long blade of a knife pierce into his leg. As the blood oozed from Weissman, he covered the kids to protect them from harm. The people converged on each other, fighting amongst themselves as the exalted Jamie watched over them. Hell would be a welcome respite to any one of the citizens of St. Argus, New Hampshire. But the power plant could not withstand further use of the universal power, and the Amenti regions under the town itself began to blow apart like an active volcano. And if the Amenti regions were severed, the creatures would die in the alien world called Earth. Jamie's body jerked violently as if he had been administered a respectable electrical shock. The red circles in his eyes pulsated and his mouth opened wide. In just a few seconds, the red light faded from view, and this man, who had been the first to have been possessed by these creatures, fell to the cement. He was categorically dead. The creature had fled from his body. All around the square they dropped as each individual bundle of light fled back to the warped region of space and time. The entire town of St. Argus lay dead around the common. Weissman, his head bashed and bleeding, grabbed the kids and held them firmly in his arms as he rose to his feet. Weissman jaunted along the rockery and opened the door to the Porsche and put the kids in the front seat. The clock tower rang out 5 times. He struggled around the side of the car and saw Marta lying in a pool of blood. Although in great pain, he bent over and lifted her into his arms. "No, you can't be dead. Not now. Not when it's ending. Marta! Marta!" he called, but she didn't answer. The stones tumbled from the rockery now. Huge chunks of burning buildings came crashing down all around him. Weissman had to get in the Porsche right away, or he too would be as dead as the people around him. He carried Marta to the car and placed her gently on the seat. "It's okay, kids. We're getting out of here. We're getting out of here." The town was literally breaking apart as he jumped in the driver's seat. He maneuvered the Porsche directly under the rockery arch. An entire section came crashing down as he skidded out the other side and across the common to the road. It was a constant battle to weave around the people and objects in the road, as well as to compete with the shaking pavement. Trees, telephone lines, and buildings tumbled to the ground as he sped down the highway and out of town. The mighty river had flooded over by McAllister's house, and a 20-foot tidal wave of water moved back toward the burning center of town. The whole valley was on the verge of collapsing inward. A few early flickers of daylight came over the hills as Weissman brought the battered Porsche past the farmers' fields and up into the mountains. He gazed at Marta's unmoving body in the back seat. It had all been in vain. He was drawn away from Marta by a group of dead bodies on the highway at the base of the mountain hill. Apparently quite a skirmish was taking place as the creatures fled. Weissman gently pushed the kids' heads down toward the seat as he approached a sign up ahead. The bloody head of Old Man Pendleton was affixed to the top of the sign. His mouth was open wide and dripping with the remaining blood from his severed body. The only words visible on the sign were, "Welcome to Pendleton." Even the sign, along with the mushy head of the old man, crashed to the ground. Weissman accelerated the Porsche up the hill. The underlying mountain rocks seemed sturdier and out of range of the underground Amenti regions. The sun illuminated the cataclysm below as he turned into the rest area by the side of the road. He lifted the kids off the seat and tried to explain to them that their mother was just sleeping as he moved across the rest area and leaned over the stone wall as he gazed below. Smoke and debris were being hurled into the blue sky. The river, now covering most of the town, suddenly began to drain inward as if the entire valley sunk away before his eyes and then slowly surged upward in a thick mixture of mud. The town and valley had been decimated, but the seemingly endless nightmare was over. He buried his head in his hands. His tears dropped onto the stone wall. In his torment, he had failed to hear the door of the Porsche open. Marta lifted his head up into the morning sun. "Mommy!" yelled the kids as they turned and ran toward Marta as she exited the car and slowly moved over to Weissman. His face brightened with a new vitality, a lifelong vitality, as he thrust his battered arms around her. They turned toward the awakening land and the new world that lay before them. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moan rounds with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off and sitting well in order smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and baths of all the western stars until I die. Ulysses, Alfred Lord Tennyson.